Before we begin this episode of Ben-Hur, a tale of the Christ, let us briefly recall what has brought us to this point in the journey. Once a noble prince of Jerusalem, Judah Ben-Hur lived a life of privilege under Roman rule. But betrayal came from where he least expected. His childhood friend, Messala, accused of a crime he did not commit. Ben-Hur was torn from his family and sentenced to the galleys. His mother and sister were thrown into a dungeon, their fate unknown. In the depths of despair and chains, Ben-Hur's remained unbroken. Years passed until a fateful encounter with a Roman commander gave him a path to freedom and to vengeance. Adopting a new identity, he trained as a charioteer and grew stronger with purpose, waiting for the day he would confront those who wronged him. Yet amid vengeance, a greater story stirred. In the shadows of Roman power, whispers of a new kingdom, one not of this world, began to rise. The path of Ben-Hur was no longer his alone. It had begun to cross with that of a Galilean who preached peace, healed the broken, and changed the hearts of men. Now, as we enter Book 5, the story of Judah Ben-Hur moves toward destiny, where ambition, redemption, and faith shall collide. The morning following the extravagant bacchanalia in the palace saloon revealed a scene of utter collapse. The divan was now littered with young patricians, sprawled as if defeated by their own indulgence. Though Maxentius was expected to arrive and the city prepared to greet him with pomp, though a legion might descend from Mount Sulpius in all its martial glory, and though Antioch might dazzle with ceremonies from Nymphaeum to Omphalos grand enough to rival anything seen before in the opulent East, none of it stirred those strewn across the divan. They lay as they had fallen or had been tossed aside by indifferent slaves. To expect them to join the day's reception was as fanciful as imagining the lifeless mannequins of an artist's studio suddenly springing up to waltz, dressed in bonnets and plumes. Yet not all who partook in the night's orgy were reduced to disgrace. As dawn filtered through the skylights, Messala quietly removed the chaplet from his head, a silent signal that the revel had ended. Composing his robe around him, he gave the saloon a final glance, then departed in silence to his quarters, his solemnity not unlike Cicero's exit after a long Senate debate. 3 hours later, 2 couriers entered his chamber. Each received a sealed dispatch directly from Messala himself, the messages in duplicate, primarily composed of a letter addressed to Valerius Gratus, the procurator still residing in Caesarea. The urgency of the task was unmistakable. One messenger would travel by land, the other by sea, both instructed to proceed with the utmost speed. The significance of the letter now demanded full disclosure. It began, "From Antioch, on the 12th day before the calends of July, Messala addressed Gratus, opening with a mock endearment, 'O my Midas,' playfully praising his fortune and acknowledging his influence with exaggerated flattery. He reminded Gratus of a once wealthy Jerusalemite family, the house of Ben-Hur, reputed for its ancient lineage and vast wealth. Messala invoked the memory of a past incident, an attempt upon Gratus's life, whether real or merely alleged, that led to the swift arrest of the family and confiscation of their property. The affair, sanctioned by Caesar himself, yielded financial rewards for both men, rewards that Messala admitted he continued to enjoy. To reinforce the wisdom of their prior decision, he recalled how the family had been silenced, the women hidden away, the son condemned to life as a galley slave. Messala pointedly noted his own desire to know whether the mother and sister were still alive, trusting that Gratus, ever gracious, would not take offense. Turning to the son, Judah Ben-Hur, Messala reminded Gratus that he had personally seen the receipt confirming the boy's transfer to the tribune of a galley. According to all expectations, such a fate should have ended in death long ago. And yet, against all odds, something incredible had occurred. The previous night, during a feast held in honor of young nobles from Rome, Messala had heard whispers of an astonishing tale. Maxentius, the consul, had arrived to lead a campaign against the Parthians. Among his ambitious companions was a certain young man, purportedly the adopted son of Quintus Arrius, the late Duumvir. This man, once thought dead, had returned not only alive but elevated in fortune and social rank. Messala emphasized the impossibility of the situation. When Arrius left to battle pirates, he had no heir. Upon his return, he brought one. That heir, said the gossip, had been rescued from the sea, clad in a galley slave's uniform. Clearly the same Ben-Hur once sent to die at the oars. By a twist of fate, Messala had come face to face with the man. Though he didn't recognize him at first, he now swore with certainty. It was Ben-Hur, his childhood playmate, the same youth who must now harbor thoughts of revenge, not only for himself, but for his family, his homeland, and the fortune stripped from them all. He urged Gratus to treat the matter seriously, no longer brushing it aside with dismissive tut-tuts. This was no longer a rumor. It was a threat. Ben-Hur was very much alive and likely planning retribution. As Messala painted the scene in words, he imagined Gratus reading the letter, his expression changing from grave concern to decisive resolve. There was no doubt. Action had to be taken. Messala concluded by stating that he would remain in Antioch, keeping an eye on the situation. Ben-Hur was currently under the tent of Sheik Ilderim at the Orchard of Palms, a location easily watched. He warned that Ilderim might soon be deported to Rome under Maxentius's orders. Time, place, and agency. These, Messala insisted, were the three pillars upon which any successful human action must rest. And now, having laid them all before Gratus, he positioned himself as the perfect agent to carry out whatever task Gratus might deem necessary. The letter closed with Messala signing his name, confident that his warning would not go unheeded. As the couriers departed from Messala's residence with the official dispatches in the early hours of morning, Ben-Hur quietly entered the tent of Sheik Ilderim. Having refreshed himself with a plunge in the lake and taken his breakfast, he now appeared in a sleeveless undertunic, its skirt barely reaching to his knees. From the comfort of his divan, the sheik greeted him with warm admiration, clearly taken by the striking presence of a man so strong, radiant, and composed. Expressing peace and goodwill, he declared his own readiness, noting that the horses were prepared as well. Ben-Hur replied with equal courtesy, expressing his thanks and confirming his readiness. The sheik clapped his hands and called for the horses to be brought, offering Ben-Hur a seat. But instead of waiting, Ben-Hur requested to harness the horses himself. He expressed his desire to personally acquaint himself with each of the noble creatures, learning their names and temperaments, recognizing that, like men, some horses responded better to sternness, while others thrived under praise. He asked for the harness to be brought, and in place of the chariot, requested a fifth horse, barebacked and swift. Intrigued by the unusual request, Ilderim gave orders for the four-horse harness and a bridle for Sirius to be brought. The sheik then spoke of his deep bond with Sirius, his loyal companion through years of desert travel and battle. Drawing aside a curtain, he invited Ben-Hur to meet the horses. At once, the animals gathered around, and among them stood a dark brown stallion with luminous eyes, a proud arched neck, and a flowing mane. The horse responded to Ilderim's touch with gentle affection. This was Sirius, the father of the four. Mira, the mother, remained safely at home, too cherished to be risked. Ilderim spoke fondly of Myra's revered status among the desert tribes, noting that her mere well-being inspired praise among thousands. As Ben-Hur approached each horse, he recognized the celestial inspiration in their names: Sirius, Mira, Rigel, Antares, Ater, and Aldebaran, the latter being the youngest yet no less spirited. Ilderim proudly explained the tradition of naming horses after stars, a practice rooted in the Arabs' deep reliance on the heavens while crossing the desert. Each name, he said, was a token of love and gratitude. When the harness arrived, Ben-Hur took the reins into his own hands, equipping the horses with care. With precision, he led them from the tent and prepared them for training. He then requested Sirius to be brought to him. Mounting the steed with effortless grace, he accepted the reins and had them separated for control. He called for a guide to lead the way and asked for water to be sent for the horses. The departure was smooth. The horses appeared calm, already showing trust in their new master. Ben-Hur rode Sirius, leading the four as if from a chariot. Sheik Ilderim watched with growing admiration, convinced more than ever that Ben-Hur was no Roman. The sheik followed on foot, surrounded by his people, men, women, and children alike, drawn by shared curiosity and excitement. Reaching the training field, Ben-Hur began with slow, straight movements, gradually moving into wide arcs. He then increased their pace from a trot to a gallop and eventually tightened the turns, guiding the horses in erratic, spontaneous paths. The four responded with unwavering coordination. After an hour, he brought them to a walk and approached Ilderim. He spoke with quiet confidence, declaring the horses ready for practice. Their coats remained flawless, their breathing still light. With pride in his voice and fire in his eyes, he began to speak of their victory, but halted himself, realizing they were not alone. By Ilderim's side stood Balthasar, leaning on his staff, accompanied by two veiled women. One of them caught Ben-Hur's attention. A flicker in his chest confirmed she was the Egyptian he remembered. Ilderim finished Ben-Hur's unspoken thought with bold certainty. This was their path to revenge and triumph. He reaffirmed his faith in Ben-Hur and declared his commitment to reward such valor. Thanking the sheik, Ben-Hur asked for water for the horses and served them himself. Then, remounting Sirius, he resumed the session. The exercises repeated: walk, trot, gallop, until the pace reached a full run. The crowd watched in awe. Ben-Hur's mastery of the reins and the horses' graceful obedience created a scene of power, unity, and elegance. Their movements, effortless and harmonious, drew admiration devoid of pity. The display seemed as natural and joyful as swallows darting in the twilight sky. While the training continued, Malik arrived on the field in search of Ilderim. Taking a suitable moment, he delivered a message from Simonides. With reverence, he first offered a prayer of peace, then handed the sheik a package with urgent instructions to read it at once. Breaking the seal, Ilderim uncovered 2 letters, both wrapped in fine linen. He read them carefully. In the first, Simonides extended his heartfelt friendship, confirming the identity of the young man, calling himself the son of Arius. He expressed his affection for Ben-Hur and urged Ilderim to support him in all things that did not conflict with honor. He also promised personal responsibility for any compensation needed. Simonides asked that his interest in the young man remain private and offered his hospitality to Ilderim and his guests on the day of the games, promising seats at the circus already reserved. The second letter offered caution. Simonides warned that the arrival of the Roman consul Maxentius signaled potential danger, especially for non-Romans possessing wealth. He advised vigilance, noting that any conspiracy would require the involvement of the Herods, in whose lands Ilderim held property. He encouraged swift action to intercept couriers on the southern roads and inspect their private dispatches for mention of Ilderim or his affairs. Though delayed, he assured the warning was still timely if acted upon immediately. He urged secrecy and advised burning the letter after reading. Reading the letters again, Ilderim folded them, returned them to the linen wrap, and secured them beneath his girdle. The training session wound down shortly afterward. In just 2 hours, Ben-Hur had accomplished more than the Roman trainer could in weeks. Ilderim, elated, gave Ben-Hur full control of the horses until the games. With triumphant conviction, he declared that victory was within reach. Back at the tent, Ben-Hur tended to the horses, then took another plunge in the lake. Sharing a cup of arak with the exuberant sheik, he changed into his Jewish attire and walked into the orchard with Malik. Their conversation drifted, but one exchange stood out. Ben-Hur requested Malik to retrieve property stored at a khan near the Solution Bridge. Then, trusting their shared identity and purpose, he asked Malik for several more favors. He explained the need for someone reliable to ensure that all race preparations were officially in order, something the impulsive sheik might overlook. Ben-Hur wanted confirmation from the circus office, especially regarding the rules, the colors he would wear, and the number of the stall he would occupy. If possible, he hoped Malik could arrange for him to be positioned next to Messala to gain a psychological edge. Malik confirmed his memory was strong when driven by the heart, prompting Ben-Hur to add one last request. Having noticed Messala's pride as chariot, Ben-Hur asked Malik to discreetly inspect it, its weight, dimensions, and especially the height of the axle from the ground. He wished to ensure there would be no technical advantage. His goal was clear, not just to win, but to humble his rival thoroughly. Malik understood and accepted the task. With that, the two returned to the dower. At the tent, they paused to refresh themselves with Laban. Shortly after, Malik left for the city. Meanwhile, a mounted messenger had already been dispatched, carrying Ilderim's secret orders, exactly as Simonides had advised. No written message was entrusted to him. He rode alone with the burden of vigilance. A servant approached Ben-Hur with a respectful gesture, carrying greetings and a message from Iras, the daughter of Balthasar. She wished to invite him for a ride on the lake. Ben-Hur, calm and rested inside his tent, chose to deliver his response personally. He slipped into his shoes and stepped out to find the alluring Egyptian. The sun had begun to dip behind the mountains, casting shadows across the orchard of palms. From a distance, the gentle sounds of sheep bells, the lowing of cattle, and the calling of herdsmen signaled the day's end. Life here remained as pastoral and peaceful as that on the desert's edge. With Sheik Ilderim away in the city, Ben-Hur had taken care of his horses, bathed in the lake, and changed into his clean white garments, fitting for one of Sadducean heritage. After an early meal, his youthful strength had returned, leaving him refreshed despite the day's earlier trials. In that serene moment, Ben-Hur found himself increasingly drawn toward the Egyptian woman. Her beauty struck him deeply, both in form and presence. He could still recall the way she looked at the fountain, her voice soft with gratitude, her eyes wide and almond-shaped, rich with meaning. Each recollection brought with it a vision of elegance, tall, graceful, wrapped in flowing robes, the very image of poetic intensity. Though his heart wasn't yet caught in love, admiration and curiosity had already claimed their place. He arrived at the lake's edge, where a simple landing led to a stairway and platform lit with delicate lamps. There, a small boat waited, light and graceful like a shell on the water. The Ethiopian, once a camel driver at the Castalian Spring, now sat poised as the rower, his dark skin set in striking contrast to a garment of shining white. The rear of the boat was draped in brilliant Tyrian red, soft with cushions and carpets, and upon the rudder seat, veiled in Indian shawls and delicate scarves, sat Iras herself. Her arms, bare and elegantly posed, demanded attention, not just in shape but in the artistry of their motion. A scarf lay loosely across her shoulders, barely concealing the grace beneath. Ben-Hur stood momentarily captivated, not so much by specific details, but by the overwhelming impression she cast. In his mind, it translated to poetry, like the verses once read of a beloved rising with the flowers of spring and the voice of doves in the land. The moment radiated with beauty, subtle and irresistible. As they set off on the water, Iras maintained control of the journey. Though Ben-Hur offered to take the rudder, she declined, reminding him this was her invitation, her moment to offer him something in return. Their conversation drifted into playful yet thoughtful exchanges, touching on names, identity, and belonging. She asked to be called Egypt, a title rich with history and pride. Through her words, she painted vivid images of her homeland, a place of peace, simplicity, and spiritual richness. She spoke of the poor, not as burdened souls, but as content in their humble desires. And she shared a tale of a rose, once wilting on the plains of Rapayam, now thriving under Egypt's nurturing air, just as she believed men of Israel could flourish only in her native land. Her passion for Egypt mirrored, in many ways, the fervor Ben-Hur had once seen in his mother as she recalled the lost glory of Israel. Moved by the parallel, he asked her for a song. Rather than repeating her hymn of the Nile, she chose instead a song from India, taught to her by a daughter of the Ganga in Alexandria. It was a poetic tale of a revered sage named Kapila. The first part of the song reflected a young warrior's journey. Kapila, known for his fearlessness, declared that his bravery came from love, the soul of a woman given to him, strengthening his own. Love, he claimed, was the true source of courage. In the second verse, the same man, now older and wise, stood as a priest. When asked how he gained his wisdom, he credited faith, again, inspired by the heart of a woman united with his. Love and faith, he believed, were the roots of both valor and wisdom. The lesson was simple yet profound: to try it and see. Ben-Hur barely had time to acknowledge the music before the boat scraped against the sand beneath. In the next moment, its bow brushed up onto the shore. But with a swift push from their dark-skinned companion, the vessel shot back into open water again, drawing a playful remark from the woman beside him about the brevity of their stay. Though he expressed a desire to take over the rudder, she declined with a cheerful laugh, claiming the boat as her own, just as the chariot belonged to him. They had only reached the far side of the lake, she said, adding that the true lesson was to stop singing. Since they had already been to Egypt, at least in imagination, it was time, she suggested, to visit the Grove of Daphne. Ben-Hur seemed disappointed at the idea of continuing in silence, but she changed the subject, asking about the Roman he had defended them from earlier. He deflected the question, musing instead about how pleasant it would have been if they were actually sailing on the Nile, among tombs and ancient spirits. But she pressed on, comparing the Roman to a monster of myth, handsome and arrogant, dangerous yet mesmerizing. She recalled how the crowd had laughed his spite, nearly being trampled by his gilded chariot and ivory wheels, which only deepened Ben-Hur's bitterness. To her continued curiosity about the Romans' origins, wealth, and purpose, he offered only vague replies. When she teased that Egypt might suit such a man more than Syria, he reminded her that Cleopatra was long dead. As the lamps of the encampment flickered into view, she declared their voyage through Egypt nothing more than a dream. No glimpse of Karnak or Philae or Abydos, only the memory of a song from India and a moment of boating fantasy. But she insisted that even without song, she could still share stories, tales of Egypt rich in wonder and mystery. And he, clearly entranced, urged her to continue through the night and beyond. When asked what kind of stories he preferred, those of mathematicians, philosophers, or magicians, he chose war and love. She agreed, offering to tell him a tale of both, a story once transcribed from a sacred papyrus, said to be pulled from the hands of the queen herself. And so began the tale of Neni Hafra. She began by stating that no two lives are identical, that human lives never follow a straight line. The most perfect lives, she explained, move in a circle, returning to their beginning so that no one can truly say where they started or where they end. Such lives, she continued, are the treasures of God, worn like rings upon the finger of his heart. Neni Hafra lived near Hin, even closer to the first cataract of the Nile, where the thunder of water crashing over rocks became part of daily life. She grew in beauty with each passing day, Much like the poppies in her father's garden, people often asked in awe what marvel she might become when fully bloomed. Her life unfolded like a series of songs, each more enchanting than the last. Born of the north and the south, between the sea and the desert, she inherited passion from one, brilliance from the other, and so, both claimed her joyfully as their own. Nature itself delighted in her presence. Birds fluffed their wings when she passed, the winds calmed to a gentle breeze, and even the lotus flowers rose from the water to behold her. The river slowed its current, and the palm trees swayed more gracefully, each offering a gift: grace, radiance, purity. At 12, she was adored, and by 16, her fame had spread, and at 20, princes and nobles came from every direction seeking her hand, only to leave, heartbroken, calling her a living goddess. Among the long line of Egypt's rulers was Orytes, an Ethiopian king well past his 100th year, who had ruled for 76. Wise and revered, he governed from Memphis but often traveled to Budos. When his wife passed, too old for proper embalming, his grief was overwhelming. A temple servant, seeing this sorrow, dared to suggest a cure: a woman named Neni Hafra. She had rejected all suitors, but surely even she could not resist a king like Orytes. She was summoned in a barge more opulent than any ever seen, escorted by a flotilla nearly as grand. Crowds gathered along the shores: Egyptians, Nubians, Libyans, and even distant Macrobians, to witness her passage. She arrived through a corridor of sphinxes and winged lions, was presented before Orytes seated on a newly built throne. He adorned her with royal symbols, kissed her, and made her queen of all queens. But that was not enough. The old king longed not just for a queen, but for her love. He showed her all he owned: cities, armies, and endless treasures, offering them in exchange for affection. Believing happiness would follow, she kissed him once, twice, thrice, despite his age. The first year, she was content, and it passed quickly. By the third, unhappiness consumed her, and time dragged endlessly. She came to understand that what she once mistook for love was merely the awe of power. Her spirit faded, her laughter vanished, and her beauty withered. Some whispered of divine punishment, others of ghosts from her past. Neither magic nor medicine could help her. It became clear she was dying. Orytes chose a crypt among the tombs of queens for her. He summoned the greatest artists in Memphis to prepare it with unmatched splendor. Still desperate, he begged to know her suffering. She told him, with fear and hesitation, that a hermit named Minofa, her childhood guardian, might hold the answer. The king, rekindled with hope, left joyfully. He summoned Minofa, who explained that Neni Hafra was dying of a broken heart, not a crime against others, but against herself. She had once loved a humble gardener's son named Barbek, and though she became a queen, she could never forget him. The king's rage turned to acceptance. He sent for Barbek and ordered an island to be built, floating on Lake Chemis, complete with palace, temple, and gardens, to be a private paradise for the lovers. He promised Neni Hafra they would have a full year together in peace. Overjoyed, she kissed his hands and feet, and her beauty, laughter, and life returned. For 1 year, Neni Hafra and Barbek lived alone upon the drifting island, unnoticed by the world, immersed in each other. When the time ended, she returned to the palace, healed. Orytes asked her whom she loved most. She kissed his cheek and said he had cured her. Laughing, the king declared that love itself was the remedy. But his joy quickly turned to fury. He told her that while Orytes the man forgave her, Orytes the king demanded punishment. She begged for mercy, but he declared her dead. At a signal, embalmers entered and began their grim work. 72 days later, Neni Hafra was laid to rest in the royal crypt. Yet no grand procession carried her across the sacred lake. By the end of the tale, Ben-Hur found himself sitting close, his hand resting atop hers on the tiller. He softly disagreed with the story's conclusion, insisting that love lives by loving. She smiled at his answer, noting that if so, there truly is no cure, except perhaps the one Oritz chose, death. They spent the rest of the evening lost in stories and quiet conversation. As they reached shore, she reminded him they would go to the city the next day. When he asked if she would attend the games, she confirmed it, and he promised to send her his colors. With that, they parted. The next day, around the third hour, Ilderim returned to the dower. As he dismounted from his horse, a man approached him, someone clearly of his own tribe. The man handed over a small package, explaining that it had been entrusted to him with instruction for the sheik to read it immediately. Should there be any response, he was to remain and await the sheik's reply. Ilderim didn't delay. He opened the package at once, noticing the seal had already been broken. The address read, "To Valerius Gratus at Caesarea." The old man scowled with irritation upon discovering that the message was written in Latin, a language he couldn't read. If it had been in Greek or Arabic, he might have managed, but now all he could decipher was the signature at the bottom, boldly printed in Roman letters, Messala. His eyes sparkled at the name, though his grumbling tone betrayed his disapproval. He then inquired about the young Jew's whereabouts, and a servant quickly informed him that the youth was out in the field with the horses. Ilderim tucked the papyrus back into its wrappings and secured the package beneath his girdle before remounting his horse. Just then, a stranger approached from the direction of the city. The newcomer, dressed in Roman fashion and speaking with the ease of one familiar with the empire's tongue, asked for Sheik Ilderim, the one known as the Generous. Though the old Arab couldn't read Latin, he could certainly speak the language. With calm dignity, he confirmed his identity. The man's eyes briefly dropped before he lifted them again and, in a composed tone, explained that he had heard of the sheik's need for a chariot driver for the upcoming games. Ilderim's lip curled beneath his white mustache in open disdain. Without hesitation, he dismissed the man, saying that he already had a driver. He turned his horse to leave, but the man lingered and spoke once more, mentioning his admiration for horses and complimenting the sheik on owning the most beautiful ones in the world. Flattery seemed to stir the old man, and for a brief moment, he hesitated, almost tempted to entertain the stranger's request. But then he declined, stating that he was too busy for such matters that day, though perhaps on another occasion he might consider it. With that, he rode off toward the field, while the Roman turned back to the city, wearing a satisfied smile. His purpose had been fulfilled, and from that day forward, right up until the grand day of the games, a pattern emerged. Each day, one or more men would come to the orchard where the sheik resided, each pretending to seek employment as a chariot driver. In this way, Messala maintained his watchful eye on Ben-Hur. The sheik watched with deep satisfaction as Ben-Hur guided his horses off the field for the midday rest. What he had witnessed filled him with pride. The 4 steeds, having completed every test, had finally raced at full speed with such seamless unity that no one appeared slower or faster. They moved as though a single spirit drove them. Ben-Hur, gently patting the old horse's neck, had resolved to return serious to the sheik and take the reins of the chariot himself. The decision surprised Ilderim, but Ben-Hur assured him one day was enough for such creatures. They showed no fear, seemed almost human in their understanding, and embraced the thrill of movement. He pointed out Aldebaran as the fastest, capable of leading the others by several lengths in a single lap, and identified Antares as the slowest. Yet, he believed Antares would triumph through tireless determination, reaching peak speed as the day faded. Ilderim nodded in agreement, but Ben-Hur's voice darkened with concern. He spoke of the Roman lust for victory, warning that honor was often sacrificed in the arena. The tricks used in chariot racing ranged from manipulation of the horses to corruption of the drivers. He urged the sheik to guard the stables with armed vigilance and unwavering eyes until the race was done. As they dismounted near the tent, the sheik swore no outsider would come near the horses. He vowed to post guards by nightfall. Then, drawing out a sealed packet, he requested Ben-Hur's help to read its contents, written in the detested Latin tongue. Ben-Hur, in high spirits, began reading aloud, but as he recognized the name, Messala to gratis, unease overtook him. His voice trembled, and twice he paused to compose himself. The letter, filled with mocking tones, soon reached a chilling section recalling the planned fate of the Hur family. Silence and delivery over to inevitable but natural death. At that point, Ben-Hur broke down. The letter dropped from his hands, and he buried his face, overcome by grief, believing his mother and sister were lost forever. The sheik, though silent, had witnessed the young man's anguish with compassion. Gently, he excused himself, suggesting Ben-Hur finish reading alone and promising to return when he was ready. Left alone, Ben-Hur collapsed upon the divan. Later, regaining composure, he resumed reading. One line caught his breath. Messala did not know if the women lived or died. Hope surged through Ben-Hur. There was still a chance. A second reading confirmed his belief, and he summoned the sheik once more. When the Arab returned, Ben-Hur shared his resolve. Though he had come only to offer his skill with horses, the strange fortune that had brought the letter compelled him to reveal everything. He believed they shared a common enemy and must unite against him. As he read aloud the part describing Messala's certainty of his location under Ilderim's tent, the sheik's face flared with indignation. He was called a traitor, threatened with being seized and shipped to Rome. His fury exploded. To think a free man, leader of 10,000 horsemen, could be reduced to a Roman's pawn enraged him. He cursed the thought of living as a slave, swore he would rather fight with beasts than submit to imperial chains. Then, grasping Ben-Hur's shoulder, Ilderim spoke with fire. If he had youth, strength, and a purpose such as Ben-Hur's, he would burn with vengeance. From land to land, he would rally mankind against Rome, fight in every battle for freedom, even seek out wolves and lions as allies if men failed him. He would use every weapon, take no prisoners, and offer none. He would pray the gods, good or wicked, to unleash every terror upon the enemy. So intense was his rage, so wild his voice and flashing eyes, that Ben-Hur could retain only a storm of emotion and defiant strength. But what struck him most was hearing his true name, son of Hur, spoken aloud for the first time in years. That someone recognized him without explanation stunned him. Yet he kept calm. He asked how the sheik had obtained the letter, and Ilderim answered plainly. It had been intercepted by his men, though known as desert robbers to outsiders. When pressed about knowing his name, the sheik admitted he knew the truth, but could not say more. Then Ilderim's tone shifted. He promised to return with fuller words, asking for the letter back, which he carefully sealed again. As his horse and escort arrived, he turned once more to Ben-Hur, demanding a reply. What would he do with such a mission before him? Ben-Hur's answer came with solemn force. He had already chosen the path of vengeance. For 5 years, he had known no rest, no joy, no distractions, only preparation. He had lived not for Rome's pleasures, but for Rome's ruin. He had trained with gladiators, mastered the combat arts, studied under war instructors, and fought with the Roman army against the Parthians to sharpen his skills. But he was not yet finished. He must become a leader. And when that day came, Rome would be held accountable. Rome would suffer as he had. The sheik, overcome with emotion, embraced him and declared that if God did not stand with Ben-Hur, it was because God no longer lived. He pledged all his power, men, horses, camels, and the desert itself, for Ben-Hur's cause. Then, without another word, he mounted and rode swiftly toward the city. The intercepted letter left no doubt in Ben-Hur's mind. It was, in essence, a confession. The The writer had clearly been involved in the conspiracy against his family. He had approved the plan that led to their ruin, shared in the wealth seized from them, and still enjoyed his share of the stolen fortune. The letter revealed fear of the one he labeled as the main offender, and that fear now drove him to consider further actions for self-preservation. He was willing to act, as advised by his ally in Caesarea, to secure himself from the threat Ben-Hur's return posed. To Ben-Hur, now holding the letter himself, it was more than a confession, it was a warning, a signal that danger still loomed. Left alone after Ilderim's departure, his mind raced. His enemies were influential and cunning. If they feared him, he had even more reason to be wary of them. He tried to focus, to think calmly, but emotions overtook him. Still, there was a strange comfort in believing that his mother and sister were alive. Even if it was only a hope drawn from a few uncertain lines, it gave his long-suffering heart something to hold on to. And now, with this clue in his hands, it felt as though answers were close, perhaps closer than ever. Sometimes his thoughts turned to the Sheik. How did Ilderim know so much about him? Surely not through Malik or Simonides, whose interests were unlikely to align with his own. Could Messala have somehow revealed it? That seemed unlikely, too risky. He had no answers, only guesses. But what reassured him most was the sense that whoever held the truth was not an enemy. A friend would speak when the time was right. All he needed was more patience, and he might have waited longer, with peace in his heart, had it not been for the guilt. The gnawing voice within whispered of his mother and Tirzah, of all they had suffered while he had been chasing shadows. To silence the pain, he wandered the orchard, accepting fruit and greetings from the day gatherers, pausing to watch birds nesting or bees humming over sun-drenched berries. But it was the lake that held him longest. There, memories surfaced of the Egyptian woman, her beauty glowing under starlight, their nights drifting across the water, her laughter, her songs, her touch on his hand as they guided the boat. Thoughts of her led to Balthasar and his tales of divine wonders. Then, naturally, came the memory of the one Balthasar awaited, the king of the Jews. That thought lingered. The mystery of that figure gave Ben-Hur a kind of peace. Yet he still couldn't fully accept Balthasar's belief that the kingdom would be spiritual. Such an idea seemed distant, soft, too abstract. A physical kingdom, like old Judea restored, was easier to grasp. He imagined a realm greater than Solomon's, and a king under whom he could fight and avenge. After the midday meal, seeking distraction, Ben-Hur had his chariot brought out and carefully examined every inch of it. The design pleased him, Greek in style, not Roman, wider, sturdier, lower to the ground. Though heavier, it offered better endurance, something his Arabian horses could match. Roman chariots, he felt, valued style over substance, while this one was built for battle. Then came horses. He hitched them to the chariot and practiced for hours, refining their movements. By sunset, his spirit had returned. He resolved to delay any move against Messala, at least until after the race. He craved the thrill of defeating his rival in front of the world. Other racers didn't matter. In his heart, the victory was already his. Moving from horse to horse, he spoke to each as a brother in arms, not a master. His words were affectionate, even playful. These creatures were more than animals. They were companions in his coming triumph. That evening, Ben-Hur waited by his tent, still without news from Ilderim. But he wasn't troubled. The Sheik would return, and all would unfold as meant to. Whether from the success of his training, the satisfaction of a hearty meal, or the calm that follows sorrow, Ben-Hur found himself almost cheerful. At last, the sound of hooves approached. Malik arrived, bearing a message. Sheik Ilderim had summoned him to the city. Ben-Hur didn't question it. Instead, he chose a horse, one not part of the racing four, and departed with Malik in silence. They made a wide detour across the river, entering the city from the west, a route chosen, no doubt, for safety. Eventually, they reached Simonides' warehouse beneath the bridge. There, Malik paused and gestured. "This is the place." Ben-Hur recognized it instantly. Malik led him up to the house above, and at the door, a familiar voice welcomed him with sacred words. "In God's name, enter." Malik stopped quietly at the doorway, allowing Ben-Hur to step inside alone. The room remained just as he remembered it from his earlier visit with Simonides. Little had changed, except for one striking addition. A polished bronze rod, rising taller than a man, now stood beside the armchair. It was mounted on a wide wooden base, with multiple silver lamps attached to adjustable arms, each casting a steady glow. The gentle light revealed the fine details of the wall paneling, the cornice with its row of golden spheres, and the softly colored dome above, its surface faintly tinted with violet mica. Ben-Hur took only a few steps before pausing. 3 people were waiting: Simonides, Ilderim, and Esther, all with their eyes fixed on him. He glanced quickly from face to face, uncertain of their purpose. His heart steadied, though his senses sharpened. Were they allies or not? Eventually, his gaze settled on Esther. The men's looks were kind, but hers held something deeper, an undefinable warmth that touched him beyond words. Unconsciously, his mind drew a quiet comparison between her and the Egyptian woman he had met before. Yet the thought vanished as quickly as it came, leaving no clear conclusion behind. Simonides greeted Ben-Hur by name, speaking with deliberate emphasis and reverence. He extended a blessing, one not just from himself, but from his entire household. Sitting tall and dignified, his face pale yet powerful, Simonides carried the air of authority that made one forget his physical frailty. His hands crossed over his chest in solemn acknowledgement. In response, Ben-Hur accepted the peace offered to him, speaking with deep emotion, and returned the blessing as a son might to a father. He made it clear, however, that he wished for mutual respect, seeking to rise above any sense of hierarchy between them. At Simonides' request, Esther brought a stool, her face glowing softly as she looked between the 2 men. Neither wanted to claim the higher seat, but as the pause grew awkward, Ben-Hur gently took the stool from her and placed it near Simonides' feet, choosing to sit there instead. Their eyes met for a brief moment, a silent exchange of gratitude and grace that needed no words. Simonides gave a slight bow in thanks, then instructed Esther to bring a document. From a panel on the wall, she retrieved a scroll of papyri and handed it to him. Simonides began to speak, unrolling the document slowly. He appreciated Ben-Hur's desire for clarity and had already anticipated the need. The statement detailed 2 essential matters: property and the nature of their relationship. He invited Ben-Hur to read the document immediately. Ben-Hur took the scroll but looked toward Ilderim, prompting Simonides to reassure him. The sheik was already aware of its contents and had even signed it as a witness. His trust in Ilderim was absolute, and Simonides affirmed the sheik's loyalty. Ben-Hur acknowledged Ilderim's loyalty and expressed his own desire to prove worthy of that trust. He then politely declined to read the papers immediately and asked Simonides to share the summary instead. The merchant agreed and instructed Esther to stand beside him, ready to receive each sheet as he read. She did so with gentle attentiveness, resting her arm lightly across his shoulder, giving the impression that the story belonged to them both. Simonides explained that only money, not property, had been saved from the Romans. Thanks to the Jewish custom of using bills of exchange, he had secured a total of 120 talents from cities across the trade world: Rome, Alexandria, Damascus, Carthage, and beyond. With that capital, Simonides had invested wisely. As he listed the gains from various ventures: ships, stored goods, cargoes in transit, animals, warehouses, bills due, and cash on hand, the total came to 553 talents. When combined with the original 120, the total wealth amounted to 673 talents. All of it he declared, rightfully belonged to Ben-Hur, making him the richest subject in the empire. Simonides handed over the scrolls with pride, not boastful, but deeply satisfied by duty fulfilled. His voice dropped slightly as he added that, with such resources, there was now nothing Ben-Hur could not accomplish. The room was charged with deep anticipation. Simonides folded his hands upon his chest once more, while Esther watched with worried eyes, and Ilderim showed clear signs of unease. There is no greater test of a man's spirit than a moment of overwhelming fortune. Ben-Hur, holding the scroll, rose to his feet. Emotion trembled within him. What had unfolded felt to him like a light from the heavens itself, one strong enough to pierce through a darkness so enduring he had once believed it eternal. With gratitude pouring through every fiber of his being, he first gave thanks to the Lord for not abandoning him. His next acknowledgement turned to Simonides, whose unwavering loyalty seemed to redeem the cruelty he had endured from others. In his heart, he declared that no man should outmatch him in generosity at such a moment of privilege. He called upon Ilderim to bear witness, asking him to listen carefully and remember his words. Esther, too, he included, recognizing her as a guiding light beside the man who had remained so faithful. With steady resolve, he offered the roll to Simonides. Every item listed in those documents, ships, houses, livestock, wealth both great and small, he returned to Simonides, sealing it all to him and his heirs forever. Esther, though overcome with tears, smiled through them. Ilderim's fingers twitched in his beard, his eyes sparkling like polished jet. Only Simonides remained calm. Ben-Hur reaffirmed his decision, his voice more steady now, but added that there was one exception, resting on a single condition. The listeners hung on his every word. He declared that the 120 talents once belonging to his father should be returned to him. At that, Ilderim's expression visibly brightened. But there was more. Simonides was asked to join him in the search for his mother and sister, pledging all his resources toward the effort, just as Ben-Hur would commit his own. The depth of emotion stirred Simonides. Reaching out, he acknowledged Ben-Hur's spirit and praised the Lord for delivering such a soul to him. Though he had served the father faithfully and honored his memory, he gently pushed back against the condition, stating that the exception could not be upheld. He then revealed a reserved document, offering it to Ben-Hur for public reading. Unrolling the supplemental sheet, Ben-Hur read its contents aloud. It was a listing of the remaining servants of the house of Hur, rendered by Simonides himself. Umrah, who managed the Jerusalem palace, Simonides, steward in Antioch, and Esther, his daughter. Until that very moment, Ben-Hur had never considered that, under the law, a daughter would share the condition of her father. In his thoughts, Esther had always stood apart, perhaps as a rival to the Egyptian, even a potential beloved. The revelation left him shaken. Seeing her blush, he averted his gaze as the papyrus curled closed in his hands. Still, he spoke from the heart, reflecting that 600 talents indeed made a man wealthy. But what mattered more was the wisdom that amassed the wealth, and the heart that remained uncorrupted by it. He declared that both Simonides and Esther, though named as servants, were to be considered free from that very moment. Sheik Ilderim would be his witness, and he vowed to commit it to writing. Simonides, however, gently corrected him. Though Ben-Hur made servitude seem like a gift, there were things even he could not change. Legally, Simonides remained a servant, not by force but by choice. He had stood with Ben-Hur's father at the door, and the awl marks remained in his ear as testament. That act had been voluntary, driven by love. Rachel, Esther's mother, had refused to marry him unless he shared her condition. Becoming a servant had been the price for her hand, and he had never regretted it. The weight of this truth caused Ben-Hur to pace the room, burdened by the longing to change what could not be changed. Though he had already been made wealthy by Arius' generosity, This greater fortune, coupled with the wisdom behind it, seemed like a divine design. He turned to Simonides for guidance, seeking help to walk the path of righteousness, to honor his name, and to serve in turn the man who by law served him. With solemn sincerity, he pledged himself as Simonides' servant forever. Simonides' expression grew radiant. He promised not only to help, but to serve with all his strength of mind and heart. His body, broken in the service of Ben-Hur's cause, could no longer contribute, but his loyalty remained unshaken. He swore upon the altar of God and all that lay upon it. All he asked was to be formally given the position he already assumed. Ben-Hur welcomed the request without hesitation. As steward, the care of all property would be Simonides' responsibility. Whether by word or document, his appointment stood firm. Just as it had been with the father, so it would be with the son. Simonides then paused, ensuring that all was understood. Ben-Hur confirmed his agreement. Then Simonides turned to Esther, calling upon her to speak. Released from the comforting presence of her father's arm, she hesitated at first. Color rose and fell from her cheeks. Finally, stepping toward Ben-Hur with graceful resolve, she voiced her simple plea. She was no greater than her mother and wished only to care for her father. Ben-Hur took her hand and gently guided her back to her seat, granting her wish with kind words. Simonides once again placed her arm around his neck, and then, for a time, the room fell into a quiet, heartfelt silence. Simonides, though seated and physically frail, carried himself with the authority of a master. Calmly, he turned to Esther, noting how swiftly the night was passing. With more yet to be done, he suggested refreshments be brought before weariness set in. Esther rang a bell, and a servant answered with bread and wine, which she personally offered to everyone present. As they were served, Simonides resumed, still composed. The understanding between them, he felt, was not yet complete. From this point forward, their lives would flow together like rivers joined as one. And for those waters to run smoothly, every cloud must be cleared from the sky above. He reminded Ben-Hur that though it had seemed he denied the claims made earlier when they last met, it had not been so. Esther had witnessed his recognition, and Malak could testify that he had not been abandoned. Ben-Hur, surprised, spoke the name aloud, Malak. Simonides explained that a man confined to a chair must rely on far-reaching hands to influence a world from which he was otherwise barred. Among those loyal agents, Malak was one of the best. At times, he also leaned on the goodwill of others, like Sheik Ilderim, whose generous heart had served him well. Looking to the sheik with gratitude, he invited him to confirm whether there had been any denial or forgetfulness regarding Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur turned to Ilderim, who responded with a glimmer in his eye, nodding in affirmation. Indeed, this was the man who had spoken of him. Simonides then reflected on the importance of discernment. He had recognized a resemblance to Ben-Hur's father, but character could not be confirmed by appearance alone. There were some to whom fortune proved a curse. Was Ben-Hur among them? To find out, he had sent Malak as his eyes and ears. The report that returned was wholly favorable. Ben-Hur responded warmly, acknowledging the wisdom within Simonides' caution. Simonides was visibly moved. The words brought him peace, easing the fear of any lingering misunderstanding. Now, he said, their joined paths could proceed as guided by God. After a pause, Simonides continued with solemn truth. Like a weaver watching the patterns form upon the cloth, he had witnessed his fortune grow steadily over time. Again and again, he had questioned the source of this prosperity. Dangers that had brought ruin to others passed over his ventures untouched. Storms that destroyed ships at sea seemed instead to hasten his own safely to harbor. Bound to one place, wholly dependent on others, he had never once suffered loss at their hands. The natural elements and the hearts of men appeared to conspire for his success. Ben-Hur found the account remarkable. So did Simonides. For years, He had wondered at the mystery. At last, he came to share Ben-Hur's conviction. God was involved. And if God's intelligence never acted without purpose, then there had to be design behind such blessings. For years, he had waited for an answer, believing that, in time, the divine purpose would be made plain. Now, at last, he believed that purpose had been revealed. Ben-Hur listened with complete attention. Simonides recalled a moment long ago when he and his people, Esther's mother among them, were gathered north of Jerusalem, near the tombs of the kings. 3 men passed by, mounted on great white camels the likes of which had never been seen in the holy city. They were strangers from distant lands. One among them had asked a startling question. Where was the one born king of the Jews? The man had explained that they had seen his star in the east and had come to worship him. The question was asked of everyone they encountered, even the guards at the Damascus gate. Though the moment was widely discussed as a sign of the Messiah, time had caused it to fade from memory. But now, in light of what had come to pass, the significance had returned with clarity. Ben-Hur confirmed that he had met Balthasar and heard his story. To Simonides, it had been nothing short of a miracle. Hearing Balthasar's tale had felt like the answer he had waited for. The divine purpose, long suspected, had finally burst into view. When the king arrived, he would come without riches, without armies, without cities or castles, only a mission to establish a kingdom and bring down the might of Rome. Looking at Ben-Hur, strong, trained, and wealthy, Simonides urged him to embrace the opportunity that heaven had clearly presented. Could any man be born to a greater glory? With great passion, Simonides pressed the appeal. Ben-Hur's heart surged, yet a question weighed on him. Balthasar had said the kingdom would be his soul's. Simonides, proud of his heritage, responded with a subtle yet firm disagreement. Though he honored Balthasar's miraculous experiences, the man was from Mizraim, not even a convert to the faith. He could not be expected to understand the full scope of God's covenant with Israel. The prophets, in contrast, had spoken directly from heaven, their number many, and their witness enduring. Their testimony, Simonides argued, must take precedence. He then called for the Torah. Even before Esther returned with the scrolls, carefully wrapped in dark brown linen marked with gold, Simonides continued. The witness of an entire people could not be dismissed. From a northern city of Tyre to the capital of Edom in the south, no faithful Jew, no one who recited the Shema, gave alms in the temple, or partook of the Passover lamb, would say the kingdom to come was anything other than worldly, like the reign of David. And where had they learned this belief? He was prepared to show. Speaking softly to Esther, he instructed her to hold the scrolls and give them to him as called. Then, with warmth in his voice, he resumed his defense. Listing each source, Simonides pointed to the successors of the prophets, holy men nearly as favored, whose teachings had continued from the time of the captivity. Names often repeated by great rabbis like Hillel and Shammai were drawn from their legacy. From the book of Enoch, he cited the Lord of the sheep, seated upon a throne, casting down other kings and punishing the tormentors of Israel with flaming justice. In the Psalms of Solomon, he recalled the plea for a king, son of David, to rise up and rule all nations by divine instruction, bringing the unrighteous to heel. And in the visions of Ezra, the second Moses, he invoked the image of a lion with a human voice, condemning Rome for its lies, destruction, and injustice, commanding it to vanish so that the earth might recover under the reign of a righteous one. These, Simonides declared, were no small testimonies. And yet, the true source was even closer. He asked for wine, and then the Torah. After drinking, he turned to Ben-Hur with a final question. Did he believe the prophets? He was certain of the answer. It had been the faith of all Ben-Hur's kindred. Then, he asked Esther to bring forth the book that held the visions of Isaiah. He reached for one of the scrolls Esther had unwrapped and began to read solemnly. the words full of ancient prophecy and divine promise. It spoke of a people who had walked in darkness, now seeing a great light, of a child born and a son given, with government upon his shoulders, whose rule would never end, rooted in judgment and justice from that time forward, forevermore. As he read, he asked with reverent weight whether the prophets were truly believed. With quiet understanding, Esther handed him the next roll. This one declared that out of Bethlehem, though small among Judah's many clans, would come forth one destined to rule Israel, a child once seen and worshipped by Balthasar in a humble cave. Again, he questioned belief in the prophets. Then came the words of Jeremiah, a righteous branch raised unto David, a king who would reign wisely, bringing safety to Judah and peace to Israel. He emphasized that this promised one would be a king. The final scroll she handed over contained the visions of Daniel, visions of one like the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven, granted everlasting dominion and glory, his kingdom never to be destroyed. He asked once more, with solemn urgency, if the prophets were believed. At that, Ben-Hur's voice rose with conviction. He believed. Simonides then challenged the depth of that belief. If the king were to come in poverty, would Ben-Hur give aid from his abundance? The answer came swift and passionate, to the last coin, to the last breath. Though he questioned why such a king would come poor, Simonides called for the words of Zechariah, which spoke of a king entering Jerusalem not with grandeur, but lowly, riding on a colt. Ben-Hur looked away, his eyes heavy. When asked what he saw, he answered darkly, Rome, its legions, its iron grip. Yet Simonides countered, casting a vision of Ben-Hur himself leading legions for the king, drawn from the multitudes of faithful. At first surprised, Ben-Hur listened as Simonides explained the true strength of Israel, not the image of a sorrowful captive nation, but a people thriving even under oppression. He spoke of Israel not just as Jerusalem, but as a vast, scattered multitude, believers in Persia, traders in Egypt, colonies in Spain, proselytes in Greece and Pontus, even worshippers within the cursed walls of Rome itself. Across deserts and seas, faithful hearts awaited the call, and all of them, united, formed a ready-made kingdom for the coming king. What Israel could do, the king could do. The words stirred Ilderim like a trumpet's blast. His heart surged with a longing of lost youth. But Ben-Hur sat still, realizing this was more than a speech. It was a call, an invitation to devote his entire being to a cause older and holier than any ambition he had known. Before, the idea had touched him, sometimes as a thought, sometimes nearing a vow. But now, it stood before him like a blazing door flung open, an invitation into a lifelong service, noble, far-reaching, and luminous with the reward of purpose fulfilled. One step more would make it real. He acknowledged the depth of Simonides' vision, conceding the king would come and the kingdom would rise. He was willing to give everything, even to embrace the destiny laid upon him by Providence and the strange fortune amassed by his host. But then he asked, should they act blindly, wait for the king's arrival, or for a sign? He turned to Simonides for wisdom born of age. Simonides, without hesitation, declared they had no choice. Producing Messala's letter, he revealed the threat, an alliance too strong to face passively. Rome's hand was already moving. If they delayed, death would find Ben-Hur. The sight of Simonides himself bore testament to Rome's cruelty. Then, leaning forward, he asked how strong Ben-Hur truly was in spirit. Ben-Hur was unsure of the meaning. Simonides reflected on the sweetness of life in youth, but also the great sacrifice he had once made, born of love. Ben-Hur questioned whether other motives could be as strong. Ambition, Simonides rejected. But when revenge was named, the flame leapt high in Ben-Hur's soul. His hands trembled, his voice shook. Revenge, he believed, was as right by law. Simonides let the emotion pass before returning to strategy. A task needed to be done before the king's arrival. Israel, though vast, had no trained warriors, no commanders, only peaceable men. Rome had ensured this, but the time for change was near. The shepherd would soon don armor, and flocks would become lions. Whoever led this preparation would naturally stand beside the king. And who better than the one who undertook this mission? Ben-Hur flushed, tempted by the vision, yet pressed for clarity. The task and the method were different things. Simonides then laid out the plan. Ben-Hur and Ilderim would act as principal agents, while Simonides stayed in Antioch to manage funds and supplies. Ben-Hur would begin in Perea, secretly counting fighting men, organizing them, training them, and hiding weapons, all with support from Ilderim, who would control the roads. From Perea, the mission would expand to Galilee and Jerusalem. Discretion was vital. None would know of the alliance until the right moment. The old merchant had already spoken to the sheik. What was Ben-Hur's answer? Ben-Hur turned to Ilderim, who affirmed the plan with conviction, pledging not only his word, but his tribe and everything he owned. All eyes now rested on Ben-Hur. He began quietly, recognizing that every man eventually drinks from a cup of destiny, except, perhaps, himself. He saw the path clearly now. If he accepted, peace would vanish. The gates to a quiet life would close forever. He would become a fugitive, pursued by Rome, condemned to hide in desolate places, sleep in tombs, and eat in caves. A sob broke the silence. Esther had turned away, her face buried against her father's shoulder. Simonides, touched, spoke gently, having forgotten her in the heat of strategy. Ben-Hur acknowledged the sorrow, but accepted it as the price of his fate. He declared that he had no choice. If remaining meant certain death, then he would begin the work at once. Simonides, ever the merchant, asked if they would formalize the agreement in writing. Ben-Hur refused. His word was enough. Ilderim echoed the sentiment. Thus the compact was made, simple in form, but one that would shape destiny. Almost immediately, Ben-Hur added a request. He would remain his own man until after the games. It was unlikely Messala would move against him before receiving a reply from the procurator, which would take at least a week. And the upcoming chariot race was a confrontation he longed for, no matter the risk. Both elders agreed. Simonides, ever shrewd, saw the delay as an opportunity. He asked for details of Ben-Hur's inheritance from Arius, whether it was property. It was a villa and houses in Rome. Simonides proposed selling it and securing the funds immediately. If Ben-Hur provided an inventory, Simonides would draw the necessary authorizations and send an agent without delay, thus evading imperial seizure. Ben-Hur agreed to provide the account the next day. With that, Simonides declared their business concluded for the night. Ilderim stroked his beard, satisfied. Esther was asked to bring bread and wine. The sheik would remain with them. And as for Ben-Hur, he requested his horses. He would return to the orchard, confident he could travel safely under cover of night. He glanced toward Ilderim and smiled. The 4 horses would be glad to see him again. As dawn broke, Ben-Hur and Malik arrived quietly at the tent's entrance. On the following night, around the 4th hour, Ben-Hur stood silently upon the wide terrace of a vast warehouse, with Esther by his side. Below, on the landing near the water, there was a frenzy of activity. Men running, shifting boxes and heavy packages, their movements swift and strained. The glow of torches crackled through the darkness, casting their laboring forms into flickering silhouettes, as if born from the myths of the East, like tireless genii fulfilling some ancient command. A galley, restless and ready, was being quickly loaded for an immediate departure. Simonides, still in his office, had not emerged. He was to hand over final instructions to the ship's captain to sail directly to Ostia, the Roman port, and from there, after delivering a single passenger, to continue toward Valencia along the Spanish coast. This lone traveler was an agent, appointed to manage the estate left by Arius the Duumvir. As the ropes would be untied and the galley set out across open waters, it would signal a final commitment for Ben-Hur, a point of no return from the mission he had accepted the previous night. If there remained any hesitation about his agreement with Ilderim, there was still a narrow moment in which he could speak and withdraw. The choice was still his to make. Such thoughts possibly lingered in his mind. With arms folded, eyes fixed below, he seemed lost in deep contemplation. Young, striking in appearance, wealthy, and only recently separated from the elite circles of Roman nobility, it was not difficult to imagine how the world called to him. It whispered of easier paths, where burdens of duty and risks of rebellion could be exchanged for privilege and peace. Doubts must have pressed in: the futility of opposing Caesar, the uncertain future of the promised king, the allure of honors and luxuries that could be bought like merchandise, and perhaps strongest of all, a newfound sense of home and companionship, something only those long lost and wandering could truly understand. And the world, ever clever in its temptations, ever ready to counsel comfort over struggle, was not speaking to him alone this night. Esther, standing beside him, gave form to those very whispers. As she shared her fears of Rome, fears that trembled in her soft voice, Ben-Hur listened. Her figure, barely reaching his shoulder, seemed almost childlike beside him. In the dimness, her face remained a shadow, but her presence stirred a distant memory. Tirzah, his sister, had once stood like this beside him, on a morning marked by grief and change. That memory softened him, and though Esther was his servant by name, she could never be treated as such by his heart. In gentle words, she spoke of Rome, not as a city of majesty, but as a monstrous force resting upon a beautiful land, feeding upon lives, luring men to ruin. Her voice faltered, weighed by emotion, yet she pressed on. Why must he stand against such a power? Why not choose peace, after all his suffering, and allow his weary heart a final rest? In that moment, the air between them grew still. Her young face, pale in the faint light, seemed to move closer. His own voice lowered, caught in the tenderness of the exchange. He leaned in, drawn to the purity of her concern. Esther asked then about the estate, whether it was near Rome, whether it was beautiful. And as he described it, his voice painted a vivid scene: a palace resting within fragrant gardens, pathways strewn with seashells, fountains bubbling both inside and out, statues hiding in shaded corners. The surrounding hills, lush with vines, offered distant views of Neapolis, Vesuvius, and the violet sweep of sea speckled with white sails. Even Caesar had a retreat nearby, but none rivaled the elegance of the old Arabian villa. And yes, the life there was peaceful, almost too much so. The days were calm, the nights even quieter. Only the soft murmur of servants, the cheerful songs of birds, or the playful splash of fountains disturbed the stillness. Time passed gently, marked only by blooming and fading flowers, drifting clouds, and the steady turn of the sun. But such quietness became a weight. It unsettled him, not through noise, but through stillness. It whispered of a life slowly slipping into idleness. And for one who carried the burden of great purpose, that silence felt like silk chains, drawing him toward a life unfulfilled, a life where nothing, in the end, would be accomplished. Esther turned her gaze toward the river, her thoughts hidden in the silence between them. He asked gently, curious about the weight behind her expression. She began with a deferential tone, but he stopped her. He asked not to be called master, only friend or brother. Though he could not see it, her face flushed with pleasure, her eyes reflecting the river's vastness. She confessed her confusion, unable to understand how someone could choose a life of such danger over the peaceful promise of a beautiful villa. He finished her thought. Yes, a life of violence and blood. But he explained, it was not choice but necessity. The Romans left no room for peace. Staying meant death. Leaving only postponed it. Messala and Gratus had stolen his father's wealth, and now, preserving that plunder mattered more to them than how they got it. There could be no settlement. Any such attempt would expose them. Even if he wished to buy peace, he wasn't sure he would. For him, peace seemed impossible. Not even in the shaded porches of his family villa. Not even with someone loving enough to help him carry life's burdens. He could not rest while his loved ones were missing. And if they had been wronged, justice must follow. If they were dead, the guilty must pay. Love, no matter how tender, could not silence the unrest in his soul or still the dreams that would haunt his nights. Esther's voice trembled with emotion. Could nothing be done? Did it truly have to be so? In answer, Ben-Hur gently took her hand, asking if she truly cared for him. She said yes, with pure simplicity. Her hand was warm, fragile within his. And at that moment, he thought of the Egyptian, so bold, so dazzling, so utterly opposite of Esther's gentle heart. It was this quiet soul beside him who stirred something deeper. He pressed her hand to his lips and promised that she would be as a sister to him, another Tirzah. He spoke of the sister the Romans had taken from him, whom he still had to find before he could ever know peace or happiness. Just then, a shaft of light fell across the terrace as a servant rolled Simonides out in his chair. They walked over to him, and the conversation shifted, with the merchant now at the center. Moments later, the galley's lines were cast off, and she turned toward the sea amid torchlight and the cheers of sailors. And so, Ben-Hur departed, heart-bound to the sacred mission, the cause of the king who was yet to come. The afternoon before the great games arrived, all of Ilderim's racing property was moved into the city and placed in quarters near the circus. Along with the prized chariots and horses, the old sheik carried much that was not of that class. Servants and armed retainers followed. Horses were led in long lines, cattle were driven, and camels bore heavy baggage. His departure from the orchard resembled a migrating tribe on the move. The people along the road laughed at the strange, colorful procession. Yet, despite his fiery temper, Ilderim was not offended by their mockery. He knew that if he was under surveillance, the informer would describe the semi-barbarous display to the Romans. The city would laugh, the Romans would sneer, but the old Arab cared nothing. By the next morning, this caravan would be far out on the desert road, taking with it every valuable possession from the orchard, everything except what was needed for the success of his 4 horses. His tents were already folded, the dower gone. In half a day, all would be out of reach. Pursuers, if any came, would find nothing left. A man, he knew, was never safer than when the world laughed at him. Neither Ilderim nor Ben-Hur misjudged the influence of Messala. Both believed that he would take no open action against them until after the circus meeting. But if he lost, especially if the loss came in the hands of Ben-Hur, they expected immediate retaliation. He might not even wait for word from Gratus. With this in mind, they prepared to vanish swiftly if danger came. Riding together toward the city, their spirits were high, and their confidence in the coming contest unshaken. On the way, Malik appeared, waiting for them. The loyal man gave no sign that he knew of the bond recently formed between Ben-Hur and Simonides, or the alliance with Ilderim. He greeted them, as usual, and handed the sheik a notice from the editor of the games. It listed Ilderim's horses and the order of the events. In his manner was the quiet confidence of one who already believed in victory. Ben-Hur learned that his color was white, while Messala's was a mix of scarlet and gold. Even now, the effect was spreading. Boys hawked white ribbons through the streets, and by the next day, every Jew and Arab in the city would wear them. In the circus, white and red would divide the galleries. Yet over the Porta Pompei, the tribunal would gleam with scarlet and gold, the seat of Roman power. Malika's preparations had gone further. Large wagers were ready to be placed, some in secret behind the consul's seat. The Romans would wager recklessly on Messala, 2-1, 3-1, even 5-1, scorning all that was not Roman. In response, plans were made to offer wagers in Roman coin, targeting Messala and his supporters directly. The goal was clear: to fix the public eye upon the duel between Ben-Hur and his enemy, to make their race the heart of the spectacle. In the quiet of his thoughts, Ben-Hur longed for more than victory. He yearned to reclaim what had been stolen from him, to break Messala in fortune as well as in pride. His face hardened with the resolve of his ancestors. If needed, he would risk enormous sums, even talents of silver, to ruin the man who had wronged him. Simonides would secure the wagers, and the God of his fathers would witness the justice of his cause. Malik then shared another piece of intelligence. Messala's chariot hub stood a palm higher than Ben-Hur's. The news thrilled the young man with sudden hope. Quietly, he instructed Malik to watch the turns from the gallery over the Gate of Triumph, near the balcony by the pillars. There, the faithful friend would see the true test of skill. At that moment, Ilderim cried out in astonishment. His finger pointed to the racing notice, demanding attention. Ben-Hur leaned in to read, the old sheik's excitement burning like the desert sun. Ben-Hur unrolled the paper, a document signed by the prefect of the province, serving as the official program for the games. It laid out, in precise order, every entertainment arranged for the great occasion. First, there would be a procession of dazzling splendor. Afterward, the customary honors to the god Consus would be performed, and then the games themselves would begin: running, leaping, wrestling, and boxing, each presented in the order announced. The program detailed the competitors, their nationalities, their schools of training, the trials in which they had already contended, and the victories they had claimed. Under the heading of prizes, the sums of money gleamed in illuminated letters, a sharp reminder that the age of simple pine and laurel crowns was fading. Once, glory alone had satisfied the victor. Now, wealth stood beside it, promising an even greater reward. Ben-Hur's eyes moved swiftly over the opening sections until they reached the announcement of the chariot race. Here he slowed. The program promised an Orestian struggle, an epic contest without equal in all Antioch. The city offered the spectacle in honor of the consul. The prize was 100,000 sestertii and a crown of laurel. There were 6 entries in total, all 4-horse teams, and to heighten the thrill, all would be released into the circus together. The program described each 4 in careful detail. 1. A team of Lysippus the Corinthian, 2 grays, a bay, and a black, victors at Alexandria and Corinth. The driver, Lysippus, and color, yellow. 2. A team of Messala of Rome, 2 white, 2 black, champions of the Circensian Games in the Circus Maximus the previous year. Driver, Messala, and colors, scarlet and gold. 3. A team of Cleanthes the Athenian, 3 grays and a bay, winners at the Isthmian Games last year. Driver, Cleanthes, and color, green. 4. A team of Dicaeus the Byzantine, 2 blacks, a gray, and a bay, victors at Byzantium this year. Driver, Dicaeus, and color, black. 5. A team of Admetus the Sinian, all grays, thrice entered and thrice victorious at Caesarea. Driver, Admetus, color, blue. 6. A team of Ilderim, Sheik of the Desert, 4 bays, their first race. Driver, Ben-Hur, a Jew, and color, white. And there it was, printed for the world to see. Ben-Hur, a Jew driver. The sight struck him with sudden force. Why that name, and not Arius? His eyes rose instantly to meet Ilderim's. In that shared glance, both understood the reason for the old sheik's outcry. The insult, the treachery, the hand behind it, they knew it well. It was the hand of Messala. Evening had only just descended upon Antioch when the Omphales, near the city's center, became the origin of a restless tide of people. From there, crowds poured in every direction, especially toward the Nymphaeum and along the east and west stretches of Herod's colonnade. The city, for that moment, surrendered itself to the pleasures of Bacchus and Apollo. The marble-roofed streets, stretching for miles, with porticos polished to flawless brilliance, served as the perfect setting for such indulgence. These streets were lavish gifts from princes, eager to immortalize themselves through extravagant offerings. Nowhere was darkness allowed to settle. The air pulsed with laughter, singing, and shouting, an endless din that echoed like crashing waters within hollow grottos. The wide range of nationalities, while perhaps surprising to a newcomer, was typical of Antioch. The Roman Empire's mission to blend its peoples had encouraged entire communities to travel freely, bringing along their clothing, customs, language, and gods. Wherever they chose to settle, they lived as they had before, building homes, conducting business, and worshiping as they pleased. Yet that night in Antioch held a distinctive peculiarity. Nearly everyone wore colors aligned with one of the charioteers set to race the next day. These identifiers came as scarves, badges, ribbons, or feathers, each a declaration of loyalty. Green signified support for Cleanthes of Athens, black for the Byzantine contender. This long-standing tradition, likely as old as the legendary race of Orestes, served as a historical curiosity, proof of how deeply men could let their passions drive them to extremes. Observers would have noted that three colors prevailed: green, white, and a striking mix of scarlet and gold. While the streets bustled with excitement, attention turned to the palace on the island. Inside the saloon, 5 great chandeliers had been freshly lit. Much of the same crowd remained, the divans still strewn with sleeping bodies and discarded garments. Dice clattered across the tables, yet many did little but wander, yawn, and exchange idle chatter, speculations about the weather, the readiness of the games, and comparisons between Antioch and Rome's circus laws. Boredom had begun to take hold. Their betting records, if revealed, would show heavy wagers placed on nearly every contest: running, wrestling, boxing. But curiously, not one dared to stake anything on the chariot race. No one was willing to bet against Messala. Not a single token of color challenged his dominance in the saloon. His victory was considered inevitable. His flawless training, his prestigious background under an imperial lanista, his horses, victors in the Circus Maximus, and his proud Roman identity all combined to make him untouchable. Reclining comfortably in a corner of the room, Messala was surrounded by admiring peers. All conversation revolved around the coming race. Among the late arrivals were Drusus and Caecilius. The young prince, evidently exhausted from traversing the bustling Omphales and beyond, collapsed beside Messala, remarking on the overwhelming crowds. Word had spread that the circus would draw spectators from across the known world. Messala's scornful amusement was clear. The others, eager to share what they had seen, recounted how even the unlikeliest groups, foreigners and desert folk, had taken to the streets wearing factional colors. Drusus, amused and dismissive, spoke of a small group of whites they encountered, carrying a banner. Though clearly unimpressed, his companion revealed they had offered the group a wager. Surprisingly, one man stepped forward to accept. When asked who he supported, the man replied, Ben-Hur, the Jew. The recollection of the moment overwhelmed Drusus with laughter, unable to finish his tale, his mirth echoing through the hall. As the conversation continued, the listeners leaned forward with growing curiosity. All eyes turned towards Caecilius when Messala looked to him for confirmation. The wager had been merely a shekel, and the room erupted in mocking laughter at the paltriness of the amount. Before more could be said, a loud commotion by the door diverted everyone's attention. The noise intensified, drawing a rush toward the entrance. Even Caecilius was compelled to join the gathering, but not before remarking, with irony, that the noble Drusus had withdrawn his wager and lost the shekel. The saloon echoed with cries demanding the arrival of a challenger clad in white. Excitement surged as guests pushed closer, drawing dice players from their tables and waking those who had dozed off. From this eager crowd emerged a familiar figure, Ben-Hur's fellow traveler from Cyprus. Dressed in pristine white robes and turban, his dignified appearance, paired with the gleam of a jewel on his finger, commanded attention as he approached the central table. With grace and formality, he greeted the Roman assembly and seated himself with the poise of one used to commanding rooms. Among the crowd, whispers identified him as Sanballat, a wealthy Jewish contractor from Rome, notorious for accepting commissions he never fulfilled. Still, his reputation for scheming made him a figure of fascination. Producing his tablets with a flourish, he explained that he had heard of the unease spreading through the palace due to the lack of challengers to Messala. His words, sharp and deliberate, challenged the arrogance of the gathering. Offers began to fly, first 2 to 1, then 3, but Sanballat goaded them further, decrying the odds as unworthy of their Roman pride. He demanded 4, then 5, calling upon their honor. The room paused, tension thick in the air, until one voice answered the challenge. Messala himself stepped forward and agreed. With theatrical flair, Sanballat requested 6 to 1 odds, boldly declaring that if Caesar were to fall, Rome would still have others with the spirit to rise in his place. Messala accepted the terms, and Sanballat drafted the terms of the wager, 20 talents, 6 to 1 odds, and Ben-Hur named as his champion. Silence gripped the room as Messala read aloud. The shock was evident. No one moved. Panic flickered across Messala's face. His pride demanded he sign, yet he lacked the means. Desperation gave way to accusation as he questioned the Jew's ability to cover such a sum. Calmly, Sanballat presented a note from Simonides, confirming 50 talents at his order. Gasps of astonishment rippled through the room. In disbelief and anger, Drusus tried to discredit the document, calling the Jew a liar, questioning how anyone but Caesar could claim such wealth. The tension mounted, charged with disbelief and growing hostility. The outcry against Sanballat grew sharper, echoing with fury, yet he remained composed, his smile only deepening into something more deliberately provoking. The longer the delay continued, the more his calmness seemed to agitate those around him. Finally, Messala found his voice, urging his countrymen to accept an even wager in the name of Roman pride. He momentarily regained his place of influence. Turning to the Jew with open contempt, he reminded him of the generous 6 to 1 odds he had offered. Sanballat, still poised, confirmed it without hesitation. Messala then insisted on deciding the wagered amount. With polite indifference, Sanballat allowed it, provided the reduction wasn't too insulting. Messala proposed 5 talents in place of 20, swearing he could prove his wealth. Sanballat, calling upon the Romans' honor rather than evidence, suggested an even 6. With both parties in agreement, they formally exchanged the documents. Then, rising with a sneer that replaced his earlier smile, Sanballat faced the crowd once more. Understanding exactly whom he was challenging, he raised his voice and extended another wager, 5 talents against 5 talents, that the white-clad challenger would win the race. The boldness of his offer stunned the gathering. He taunted them further, asking if it would be said in the circus that a Jew had entered the palace of Roman nobility, including a descendant of Caesar himself, and dared to lay down such a challenge without a single man rising to meet it. The insult struck deep. Drusus, unable to ignore the provocation, demanded that the challenge be written and left on the table. If Sanballat truly possessed such funds and dared place them on such odds, Drusus vowed it would not go unanswered. With his usual composure, Sanballat complied, set the offer down, and calmly announced that it could be delivered to him before the race, as he would be seated with the consul above the Porta Pompey. He departed under a storm of jeers, but unaffected, as if untouched by the noise behind him. That night, the news of the astonishing wager spread quickly across Antioch, and when word reached Ben-Hur, resting quietly with his team, it came with the knowledge that Messala's entire fortune now rested on the coming race. Yet, with that burden, Ben-Hur drifted into the soundest sleep he had known. The great circus of Antioch stood proudly on the southern bank of the river, almost directly facing the island. Its design followed the traditional architecture of Roman circuses. These games, intended as a generous gift to the people, were entirely free, allowing anyone to attend. Despite the building's enormous capacity, a wave of anxiety swept the city's population. Fearing they might not find a place inside, eager spectators began gathering a full day ahead of the event. They crowded the open grounds nearby, setting up temporary shelters that resembled a waiting army encamped for battle. At midnight, the gates were thrown open, and the masses surged in. Assigned their places, they settled with a stubbornness that only an earthquake or a fully armed legion could disturb. They passed the night sprawled across the benches, some dozing, others chatting in anticipation. When dawn broke, they had their breakfast right where they lay, and by the end of the day's program, they remained in those same places, still patient, still hungry for the spectacle. As the morning light spread, the more distinguished citizens, with their seats already secured, began making their way to the circus. Among them, the nobility and wealthy elite traveled in litters, accompanied by servants in formal attire. By the second hour, a steady stream of humanity flowed from the city, unbroken, countless, as if the whole of Antioch were pouring toward one single destination. As the sun's shadow passed halfway across the citadel's official sundial, a legion in full ceremonial gear emerged from Mount Sulpius. Marching proudly, with standard aloft, they crossed the bridge into the city. Once their rear guard vanished, it could be said that Antioch was truly emptied. Though the circus could never contain everyone, the entire populace had nonetheless departed in its direction. A large crowd gathered along the riverbank to witness the consul's grand arrival from the island. He came aboard a state barge, and as he landed, the legion greeted him with full honors. For a brief moment, the dazzling military display outshone even the lure of the circus itself. By the third hour, the vast audience had assembled. Then, a blast of trumpets called for silence, and over 100,000 eyes turned toward the eastern end of the building. There stood a splendid structure, the centerpiece of attention. At its base was a wide-arched gateway called the Porta Pompey, flanked on both sides by carceres or stalls, each fronted with massive gates. Rising above these stalls, a decorative cornice supported a low balustrade, behind which rows of tiered seats formed a theater-like arrangement, filled with splendidly dressed dignitaries. At the very center, seated on an elevated tribunal adorned with military insignia and banners, was the consul himself, occupying the seat of highest honor. Flanking the entire structure, twin towers not only added grandeur, but also supported the purple velaria. Broad awnings stretched between them to cast a welcome shade over this distinguished section as the sun climbed higher. This impressive eastern structure also served to help the observer imagine the rest of the interior. One need only imagine themselves seated beside the consul, facing westward, with the entire circus layout spread before their eyes. To either side, Vast entrance gates opened into the structure, each one guarded and connected to the flanking towers. Directly below lay the arena, a broad, flat space covered in fine white sand. This was the stage for all contests except the race itself. Looking straight ahead, a pedestal could be seen at the far end of the arena, bearing 3 intricately carved gray stone cones. These marked the first goal, the turning point for racers, and would later become the focal point of countless gasps and cheers. Just beyond the pedestal and its accompanying altar began the spina, a wall running exactly 200 yards, one full Olympic stadium in length. It rose 5 to 6 feet in height and 10 to 12 feet in breadth. At its far western end stood another pedestal with similar cones, marking the second goal. The racers would enter from the right of the first goal, keeping the spina always to their left. Since the start and finish lines lay directly in front of the Porta Pompei, the consul's view was widely considered the most privileged in the entire circus. Turning attention to the perimeter of the race course, one would notice a solid wall, plain-faced, standing 15 to 20 feet high, with a balustrade similar to the one over the carceres. Following this upper balcony around the entire course, it was broken in 3 places to allow access, 2 exits to the north and 1 grand passage to the west. The western gate, elaborately adorned, bore the name Gate of Triumph, for through it the victors would exit, crowned, celebrated, and honored with all the pomp of a Roman procession. At the western end of the circus, the upper balcony curved into a grand semicircle, embracing the course and supporting 2 spacious galleries above. Just behind the balustrade crowning this upper edge, the first row of seats began, and each bench ascended in gradual tiers, rising one above the other. The result was a magnificent visual sweep, a human amphitheater glowing with vibrant colors, teeming with thousands of excited faces and richly woven garments sparkling beneath the sun. The common people had gathered in large numbers on the western side, occupying the open areas beyond the range of the Valeria, the stretched awnings that shaded the wealthier spectators seated in more privileged positions. The contrast between the sunlit crowd and the shaded elites gave the arena an even deeper sense of layered drama. As the trumpets rang out in a brilliant flourish, a hush fell across the vast assembly. Every heart stilled, every eye turned toward the east, and from the great arched passage of the Porta Pompei, a sound emerged, first faint, then growing, a harmonious blend of voices and instruments, marking the ceremonial beginning of the games. The procession began slowly. Leading it was a chorus, their steps measured and melodic. Behind them walked the editor, the patron of the games, alongside the city's civic leaders, adorned in robes and garlands, radiant in their authority. Following these dignitaries came the gods themselves, some borne high on platforms carried by men, others gliding in ornate, 4-wheeled carriages adorned with gold and symbols of divinity. Next came the competitors, the athletes of the day, each dressed exactly as they would perform, be it for the foot race, the long jump, wrestling, boxing, or the grand chariot race. They moved with deliberate grace, crossing the arena and proceeding along the full circuit of the course. It was a display both elegant and powerful. A wave of admiration swept ahead of the procession, much like water rising before a ship's bow. Though the carved gods gave no sign of acknowledgement, the living figures, the editor and his retinue, returned the crowd's energy with smiles and gestures. It was the athletes who received the loudest cheers. Almost every spectator had placed some small wager, perhaps no more than a mite or a farthing, on one or another of the competitors. That personal stake made the reception even more intense. As each class of contestant passed by, certain favorites emerged clearly. Their names were shouted louder, and they received more garlands and wreaths tossed down from the balconies above. If any doubt had lingered over which events stirred the deepest passion, the arrival of the charioteers dispelled it completely. Their presence electrified the circus. The vivid splendor of their chariots, the sleek beauty of their horses, and the confident bearing of the drivers combined into a spectacle no one could resist. Each charioteer wore a sleeveless tunic of fine wool, dyed in the color assigned to their racing faction: green, yellow, blue, white, scarlet, or gold. All but one were accompanied by a mounted escort, and all wore helmets, except for one figure, Ben-Hur. Alone and unarmored, his solitary presence was striking, and not without meaning. Whether it was pride or suspicion, he had chosen to enter differently. As the drivers came closer, the energy of the crowd surged. Spectators rose from their benches, the air filled with shouts, some high-pitched, likely from women and children, and others booming with the roar of men. Floral offerings and colored streamers thickened into a storm of color, raining down upon the charioteers. The chariot beds, already heaped with garlands, threatened to overflow. Even the horses received their share of admiration, reacting to the crowd's excitement as if they too understood the moment's grandeur. It quickly became clear that some drivers were far more beloved than others. The crowd made their preferences known without restraint. Observing closely, it was apparent that nearly every person wore a sign of allegiance: a ribbon on the chest, a band in the hair, bearing the colors of their chosen faction. Some wore green, others yellow or blue, but above all, two colors dominated: white and the fiery blend of scarlet and gold. In gatherings of the modern kind, especially where heavy bets depend on the outcome of a race, people usually choose their favorites based on the strength and skill of the horses. But in this ancient assembly, national allegiance determined preference. The Byzantines and Sidonians had little support, their cities scarcely represented among the spectators. The Greeks, though present in greater numbers, were divided in loyalty between Corinth and Athens, their colors, green and yellow, barely visible in the crowd. Messala's bold scarlet and gold might also have lacked influence, if not for the citizens of Antioch. Known for their desire to flatter the powerful, they allied themselves with the Romans by adopting the colors of their favored charioteer. This left the rural Syrians, Jews, and Arabs to form the strongest opposition. United by their belief in the unmatched bloodline of the Sheik's 4 horses, and driven by a deep resentment toward Rome, they rallied behind the white. Loud and passionate, they appeared to be the most numerous and spirited faction in the arena. As the charioteers continued their ceremonial circuit of the track, the excitement of the crowd intensified. At the second turn, where white banners dominated the galleries, the cheers grew deafening, and garlands rained down from every direction. Cries rang out, each faction calling the name of its champion with mounting fervor. With the procession complete, the crowd returned to their seats. Conversations resumed across the benches. In one corner, Roman sympathizers admired Messala's striking appearance and the lavish design of his chariot, gleaming with ivory and gold. Their words carried a tone of admiration and hope for his victory. Elsewhere, a very different kind of talk was spreading. Supporters of Ben-Hur, full of conviction, praised his calm presence and powerful form. They noted the excellence of his horses and spoke of the techniques he had reportedly learned from the Romans themselves. The admiration crossed genders and classes, some even claiming he surpassed Messala in both skill and appearance. Encouraged by these impressions, a few dared to place bold bets in his favor. Yet not all agreed. An Antiochian, seated prominently on the balcony, scoffed at such confidence. He reminded others that vast sums, 50 talents in total, had been wagered on Messala, many of them by the Roman himself. The debate became spirited, sharp, and not always civil. By the time the march concluded and the procession exited once more through the grand gate of the Port of Pompey, the air was charged with anticipation. For Ben-Hur, it was clear his prayer had been answered. The hopes, tensions, and attention of the East had converged on this one monumental clash, his chariot against Messala's. By mid-afternoon, around 3 o'clock in modern reckoning, the events of the day had concluded, except for the most anticipated of all, the chariot race. Understanding the crowd's need for rest, the organizer wisely announced a recess. The vomitoria were opened, allowing spectators to pour out into the portico, where vendors awaited with food and refreshments. While many eagerly stepped outside, those who remained inside passed the time yawning, chatting, and speculating over the results of previous contests. At that moment, the crowd divided clearly into two emotional camps: those who had won and celebrated cheerfully, and those who had lost, now visibly sour and irritable. During this intermission, another wave of spectators arrived, citizens who had only come for the main event. These latecomers, hoping to avoid disturbance or offense, quietly took their reserved seats. Among them were Simonides and his party, whose places were near the northern entrance, directly across from the consul's position. The merchant, unable to walk, was carried in a chair by 4 sturdy attendants. His arrival drew significant attention. Whispers of his name rippled through the aisles, accompanied by excited attempts to catch a glimpse of him. Stories of his fortune, both gained and lost, had become something of a legend, and many were eager to see the man behind the myth. Ilderim also received a warm welcome, being more familiar to the crowd. But the others in their group were unknown: Balthasar and the 2 women who remained closely veiled. People respectfully made way for them, and the ushers helped them settle comfortably near the balustrade that overlooked the arena. Cushions and footstools had been arranged in advance to ensure their comfort. The 2 women were IRAs and Esther. Once seated, Esther seemed uneasy. She scanned the vast amphitheater nervously, then pulled her veil tighter around her face, as though trying to shield herself from its overwhelming presence. In contrast, IRAs allowed her veil to slip down, revealing her face with practiced elegance. She appeared completely at ease, absorbing the spectacle with the poise of someone long accustomed to being the center of attention. As the new arrivals began to observe the scene before them, attention shifted toward a group of workers entering the arena. These men began stretching a white chalk rope across the track, connecting the balconies near the first turning post. At the same time, 6 officials emerged from the Port of Pompey and took their positions, each in front of one of the stalls holding the race chariots. The excitement within the crowd intensified. The tunics worn by these gatekeepers matched the colors of the teams, helping everyone immediately recognize where each competitor had been placed. Murmurs spread quickly through the galleries. Observers eagerly announced where each team had landed. The green chariot in stall 4 on the right, representing Athens, the scarlet gold of Messala in stall 2, and finally, the white in stall 1. Though at first there was confusion, the black had taken the outermost position, and the white was confirmed in the second stall on the left. These seemingly minor details stirred a wave of tension and speculation among the fans, each faction analyzing the setup for advantage or omen. Amidst this, IRAs turned to Esther with a casual observation about Messala's appearance, comparing him to the beauty of Apollo. Though Esther had never seen him before, the thought that Messala was not just her father's enemy, but Ben-Hur's too sent a chill through her. She glanced briefly in the direction of the stalls and quietly prayed, drawing her veil even tighter. Nearby, Ilderim was engaged in a quiet conversation with Simonides, noting Ben-Hur's stall assignment, second on the left, just beside the Port of Pompey. Esther, assuming this was a reference to Ben-Hur, also looked that way, though only for a moment before retreating into herself with another silent prayer. Shortly after, Sanballat arrived. He had come directly from the stables and delivered an update with calm confidence. Ilderim listened intently, his eyes bright with anticipation as he absently stroked his beard. According to the latest report, the horses were in excellent condition. The Sheik's only hope now was that if defeat should come, it would not be at the hands of Messala. Sanballat then approached Simonides, producing a tablet that held the day's final update. He reminded the merchant of the wager arranged with Messala the previous night and noted that an additional bet, conditional upon written confirmation, had now been formally accepted and documented before the race. Simonides examined the tablet with care, recalling that a representative had already visited him earlier to confirm whether Sanballat truly had such funds available. He accepted the record, but advised that, should Sanballat lose, repayment would be straightforward. Yet if he won, he must not let the signatories escape their dues. Not a single shekel. It was the same level of ruthless precision their opponents would surely apply. Sanballat acknowledged the advice with confidence, though he declined an invitation to sit with the party. Duty kept him near the consul. Young Roman nobles, as he implied, were quick to stir if left unsupervised. With that, he took his leave, offering peaceful wishes in parting. Soon, the intermission drew to a close. Trumpets signaled the audience to return, and they rushed back to their seats. In the arena, preparations resumed. Attendants climbed atop the dividing wall and placed 7 wooden balls on a platform near the second goal at the western end. On a similar structure at the first goal, they set up 7 wooden dolphins, both items symbols used to count laps during the race. Balthasar, unfamiliar with the tradition, looked puzzled. Ilderim explained that each ball and dolphin represented a completed round, to be removed one by one as the laps were finished. Balthasar listened quietly, still uncertain why he had chosen to witness the event at all. The final arrangements complete, a trumpeter beside the editor stood ready to sound the opening signal. All across the immense structure, conversation hushed, and the collective gaze turned eastward, toward the closed gates of the 6 chariot stalls. The building housing the stalls was semicircular in shape, recessed at the right, so each stall stood at equal distance from the starting line. A chalked rope stretched across the arena. Excitement reached a peak. Even Simonides, despite his usual composure, showed a visible flush on his face. Ilderim, too, was restless, tugging rapidly at his beard. Esther, her heart pounding, sat quietly with her veil drawn tight, watching intently, not for Messala, as IRA's was, but for Ben-Hur. At last, the trumpet pierced the air. Starters, 1 for each chariot, leapt into position from behind the goalposts, ready to assist if needed. Another blast followed. Instantly, the stalls were flung open. The attendants on horseback emerged first, 5 in number, since Ben-Hur had declined such aid. They rode forward swiftly, barely noticed by the crowd, whose attention was fixed on the sounds rising from within the stalls, the heavy stomps of impatient horses and the tense voices of drivers. The chalk line was then reset, and the gatekeepers called to their teams. On the balconies above, ushers waved their arms and shouted commands, but the noise of the crowd surged beyond containment. The 6 chariots exploded out of their stalls like missiles fired from cannons. The audience, electrified, rose as one, leaping to their feet, screaming with joy, their cheers filling the sky. This was the moment they had long awaited, the true climax of the spectacle, the promise that had fueled endless conversations since the games were first announced. As the racers burst into view, IRAs eagerly pointed out Messala, but Esther, without responding, had eyes only for Ben-Hur. In that fleeting moment, she felt a wave of bravery and awe, an understanding of how, in moments of great performance before countless eyes, some hearts find courage even in the shadow of danger. She briefly lowered her veil, grasping for herself a taste of that same heroic spirit. Though the racers were now in full view, the race had not truly begun. Each chariot had yet to cross the chalked line. That line was more than ceremonial. It was the real test of a skilled start. Striking it too fast risked chaos. Approaching it too cautiously meant falling behind instantly. And in this sport, to fall behind early was to surrender the coveted inner lane next to the dividing wall, the most advantageous position of all. The spectators understood these dangers well. As they watched with held breath, many recalled the words of old Nestor, who once told his son that strength alone did not win races, but wisdom and timing. In that pause before motion, in that second of precision and strategy, many hoped they were already witnessing a glimpse of the ultimate victor. By the time the competitors approached the starting line, the entire arena blazed with sunlight. Each charioteer had only one thought: locating the chalked rope and claiming the critical inner lane. But since all 6 contenders aimed for the same narrow path with furious speed, a collision felt almost certain. At such a moment, even the smallest delay or error, whether a late signal from the editor, a drifting mind, or a slipped rein, could bring disastrous consequences. The space across the chalk line stretched 250 feet wide. This was not simply a matter of strength or speed. It demanded precision, instinct, and an unwavering focus. The pull of the massive crowd, shouting and leaning in anticipation, created a magnetic distraction. In such tense seconds, even an innocent glance from a friend or admirer could prove fatal. Yet despite the risk, the scene below was breathtaking. The arena, surrounded by gray stone, shimmered with motion and color. The chariots glided onto the field like living ornaments, graceful and radiant with gold and ivory. Among them, Messala stood out, flaunting Roman pride. The charioteers, half-clad and sculpted by years of training, stood upright in their narrow cars, holding their reins taut and their goads ready. Their horses, beautiful, lithe, and thunderously powerful, seemed almost untethered from the earth. Muscles rippled across their glossy frames. Their nostrils flared as they surged forward, dancing on hooves too delicate for sand yet strong enough to crush with a blow. Even their shadows raced beside them, echoing the vitality of the living force in motion. With each driver pushing for the inner line beside the central barrier, none dared yield. A single moment of hesitation could mean losing the race altogether. From every bench came a single, deafening roar, a flood of voices urging them forward. Then came the moment. The trumpeter at the editor's side gave the signal. Though barely audible through the crowd's roar, the judges saw his motion and dropped the rope just in time. So close, in fact, that one of Messala's horses brushed against it mid-fall. Undeterred, the Roman immediately released his reins, cracked his whip, and surged ahead with triumphant confidence. His chariot took the inner wall. The Roman crowd exploded in celebration. Their cry, shouting the name of their god and champion, rippled through the entire amphitheater. But the maneuver came at a cost. Messala's axle struck the leg of a rival's horse, throwing the Athenian team into chaos. The animals staggered, their rhythm broken, and the Athenian lost momentum. Horror spread through the onlookers, except for the Roman sector, where victory seemed already secured. Meanwhile, Sanballat, poised to speak with tablet in hand, turned toward the course of the sound of a sudden crash. Below, the confusion had escalated. The Athenian tried to veer away, but his path crossed another competitor. Their chariots collided violently, sending Cleanthes under the hooves of his own horses, a gruesome sight that made Esther turn her eyes away in terror. The race didn't pause. The Corinthian and Byzantine teams advanced, and the Sidonian followed in close pursuit. Sanballat scanned the track, searching for the man he backed, Ben-Hur. In the chaos, he rose, shouting wagers in support of the Jew, but the frenzied Romans, drunk on Messala's early lead, ignored him completely. When Esther dared to look again, attendants were clearing the broken wreckage and fallen racer from the track. Everywhere, Greeks raised cries of outrage and pleas for revenge. But suddenly, her heart lifted. Ben-Hur had survived the crush. Not only that, he was still in the race, running neck and neck with Messala. Behind him came the rest, pushing furiously to catch up. And so the true contest began. Not just a race of wheels and reins, but of spirit, resolve, and the soul of thousands looking down from the crowded terraces above. At the moment the drivers lunged forward in pursuit of position, Ben-Hur found himself at the far left of the 6 chariots. Like the others, he was briefly blinded by the arena's glaring brilliance. Still, he managed to study his rivals and understand their intentions. His eyes settled briefly but intently on Messala, not merely a competitor, but a sworn enemy. Despite the sun casting heavy shadows across his features, Ben-Hur perceived something beyond the patrician beauty and prideful stillness, an inner tension, cold and calculating, that exposed the Roman's ruthless intent. It was a stillness not of calm, but of readiness, something sharp and dangerous, as if drawn tight like a bow. In that same instant, Ben-Hur's own resolve crystallized. Nothing else mattered, neither honor, glory, nor the roar of the crowd. This race was now a matter of justice. Whatever the risk, he would defeat this man. Even his own life would not stand in the way. Yet his focus was not driven by rage or recklessness. There was no blinding surge of blood to his head, no reckless trust in luck. He did not believe in chance. He had a plan, and with clarity of mind, he committed himself to the path ahead, alert and fully present. Even before reaching the center of the arena, he saw that Messala, if unopposed, would easily claim the wall. And Ben-Hur no longer doubted the rope would fall just in time. Messala's confidence in that timing was too perfect. It occurred to him that some quiet arrangement might have been made between the Roman and the editor. What Roman official wouldn't secretly favor one of his own, especially one so well connected, so adored by the people? That thought alone explained Messala's reckless charge forward, while others, more cautious, held back in anticipation of the signal. Recognizing the reality of the moment, Ben-Hur did not resist. He gave up the inside track for now. Then the rope dropped. Instantly, the 5 rival chariots sprang into motion. Holding back for the briefest breath, Ben-Hur then steered sharply to the right. With flawless control, he guided his Arab team across the trailing paths of the others. The angle was narrow, deliberate, and brilliant, designed to gain ground without costing speed. While the crowd was still gasping from the chaos behind, where the Athenian had lost control and others struggled to avoid a pileup, Ben-Hur surged forward, coming out neck and neck with Messala, though positioned to the outside. His seamless maneuver had not gone unnoticed. From the benches came waves of applause. The spectators, sharply aware of the skill on display, reacted with thunderous approval. Esther, watching breathless, clasped her hands with unexpected joy. Sanballat, now grinning, called out his wager once more, but no one dared to accept it. The Romans themselves began to question whether their champion had, in fact, met his match, and that in a Jew. Now the 2 rivals raced forward together, side by side, the space between them tight and charged. They approached the second turn. From the west, the turn curved sharply around a semicircular wall, parallel to both the track and the opposite stands. It was the most difficult curve in the entire course, the one that had once cost Orytes' life. As the chariots approached, an unnatural hush spread over the arena. For the first time since the race began, the rumble of wheels and clatter of reins echoed clearly through the stillness. Then it happened. Messala, finally recognizing who rode beside him, unleashed his audacity. With a sudden flick of his practiced hand, He lashed at Ben-Hur's horses, cutting through the air with stunning precision. The shout he gave was bold, and though no words could be heard above the racing hooves, his gesture carried unmistakable meaning. The blow landed with cruel force. The reaction was instant. Ben-Hur's horses, nurtured with nothing but gentleness, reared and trained with affection, had never known such pain. The violation shook them to their core. Panic surged through their graceful bodies. No whip had ever touched them like that. Startled and terrified, they leapt forward as if fleeing death itself. From the audience, a collective gasp turned to outrage. For a moment, the entire amphitheater stood in stunned silence. Then, like a storm breaking, the outcry erupted. Booming down from the seats, a thunder of protest against the brutality they had just witnessed. The four horses sprang forward together, and the chariot leaped ahead with them. Ben-Hur's previous hardships had unknowingly prepared him for this moment. The strength in his hands, the steadiness of his grip, these were born from the years he spent rowing against the sea's force. The jolts beneath his feet now were nothing compared to the wild, staggering motions of a ship in a storm. Anchored by his experience, he kept firm control of the reins, his voice calm and reassuring as he guided his horses around the dangerous turn. Before the crowd's fevered excitement even began to calm, he had regained command. Not only that, by the time they reached the first goal again, he was once more racing side by side with Messala, carrying with him the admiration of all spectators not aligned with Rome. The overwhelming support for Ben-Hur became so obvious, so powerfully expressed, that even Messala began to sense danger in pushing his tactics further. As their chariots sped around the turning point, Esther caught a glimpse of Ben-Hur's face. It was slightly pale, raised just a bit higher than usual, yet carried a calm and almost serene expression. Then, high above the course, a man climbed onto the structure at the west end of the dividing wall and removed one of the wooden markers, an indication of a lap completed. On the eastern end, a dolphin marker came down at the same time. Another marker, then another. 3 laps were now finished. Still, Messala held the inner track, and Ben-Hur stayed exactly alongside him. The remaining racers kept their positions behind. The competition began to resemble a Roman-style double race. Ben-Hur and Messala in the lead division, with the Corinthian, Sidonian, and Byzantine forming a trailing second. Around the arena, ushers worked to return the spectators to their seats, though the roar of the crowd followed the racers like a moving wave. In the 5th lap, the Sidonian briefly found room outside Ben-Hur, only to lose the position quickly. The 6th lap began with no significant change in their order. By this point, the speed had increased noticeably. The racers, man and beast alike, were now fully in the rhythm of the competition, aware that the final stretch was drawing near. It was time for the true contender to reveal himself. The intense focus that had long centered on the rivalry between the Roman and the Jew was shifting into concern for Ben-Hur. Around the circus, spectators leaned forward, silent except for the movement of their heads tracking the racers. Ilderim stopped combing his beard, and Esther's fears were momentarily forgotten. From beneath the consul's canopy, Sanballat loudly offered wagers on Ben-Hur's victory, calling out amounts with increasing confidence, but found few takers. Even as a young Roman prepared to accept a bet, his friend warned him off, pointing out the signs. Messala, they observed, was already at his maximum speed, leaning dangerously over the edge of his chariot, his reins loose and flapping like ribbons. Ben-Hur, by contrast, was applying full weight into his control of the reins, holding his horses back strategically. The warning was clear. If divine favor did not intervene, Messala would likely be overtaken by the Jew. The Roman spectators, clinging to hope, raised a loud cheer, invoking their gods for victory. The reaction was so loud it caused the overhead awnings to tremble with vibration. If indeed Messala had reached his peak performance, it was beginning to show. His horses, heads lowered, appeared to skim the ground. Their nostrils were wide and red, eyes bulging from the strain. They were giving everything they had, but the question remained, could they sustain this pace? It was only the beginning of the 6th round, and then, just as they approached the second goal, Ben-Hur subtly maneuvered his team behind Messala's chariot. The supporters of Messala reached a peak of celebration. Cries and cheers exploded from their section. Their factional colors waved with triumph, and wagers were hurriedly scribbled into tablets. Down near the Gate of Triumph, Malik struggled to maintain hope. He had remembered Ben-Hur hinting that something pivotal would happen during the turn at the Western Pillars. But now, well into the 6th round, nothing had occurred, and it seemed that Ben-Hur was barely holding a place behind his rival. At the eastern end of the track, Simonide's group watched in silence. The merchant's head was bowed in thought. Ilderim's fingers twisted his beard, his eyebrows low and tense, his eyes flashing only now and then. Esther barely seemed to breathe. Only Ira seemed pleased by what she saw. Down the long straight stretch, the home stretch, Messala led, Ben-Hur clinging closely behind. Their competition mirrored an ancient tale, the pursuer close enough to feel the heat from the lead team's backs, to see their shadows stretching out before him. At the turning point, Messala took a perilous line, brushing dangerously close to the stone wall. A slight misjudgment could have shattered his chariot completely. And yet, after the turn, no one could distinguish which trail in the dirt belonged to which racer. They were that close, that exact in alignment. As the chariots raced by the stands once more, Esther again saw Ben-Hur's face. This time, it had grown even paler than before. Simonides, sharper in judgment than Esther, quietly noted the shift in Ben-Hur's demeanor just as the rivals entered the course. His expression revealed more than confidence. It suggested a deliberate strategy taking form. Ilderim, standing close, affirmed the insight with restrained excitement. He observed the condition of Ben-Hur's horses, clean, fresh, untouched by the heat of previous runs. It was clear they had held back for purpose. Now was the time to watch. Only one ball and one dolphin remained on the entablatures. The entire crowd held their breath. The final stretch was upon them. The Sidonian charioteer lashed his fore with urgency born of fear. They responded in a desperate surge, briefly showing promise of taking the lead. But it was just that promise. The Byzantine and Corinthian followed suit, trying their hand, but with no better result. Their failures effectively removed them from the competition. Instinctively, the audience, except for the Romans, shifted their allegiance to Ben-Hur. Their support rang out boldly. The voices of the crowd thundered his name in unison. The cry of Ben-Hur, Ben-Hur, rolled like a wave toward the consular stand. From the tiers above, encouragement rained down, orders wrapped in hope, pleading, and adrenaline. Shouts urged him to seize the wall, to unleash the Arabs, to make his move now or never. Arms stretched down from the balconies, pleading, urging him forward. Yet he held position. Halfway around the course, he was still trailing. Even at the second goal, no change. It appeared he either didn't hear or had chosen patience. Then Messala began to draw on his left-hand horses to make the tight turn, slowing down just slightly, still burning with ambition. He imagined the glory just ahead. Fame, wealth, advancement, vengeance. But in that moment, Malik, watching from the gallery, saw Ben-Hur rise slightly, leaning in, and release the reins. The whip in his hand came alive, slicing the air, coiling and cracking. Not with pain, but with urgency. Though it never struck, it ignited something fierce. The charioteer's energy coursed through the reins, and the 4 Arab steeds, bound by shared will, leapt forward as one, surging until they ran side by side with the Romans' team. Messala heard them coming, but didn't dare glance. The roar of the crowd had gone silent to him. Only the sound of Ben-Hur's voice remained. In the old Aramaic tongue, rich with heritage and pride, he cried out to his horses, calling them by name, evoking memories of tents, children's songs, and the promise of home. His words were a chant of destiny, of triumph, of returning in glory. And through it all, he urged them forward, toward their waiting tribe, their master, their honor. The moment of conquest had come. He declared the victory, steadying them in the afterglow of the feat. There was no elaborate maneuver. The timing was everything. As Messala curved around the goal, Ben-Hur veered inward just enough to gain the advantage. Close but controlled, precise in direction. The entire audience understood instantly. They saw the move, the synchronicity, the close shave of the wheels. Then, a loud, shattering crash rang out. Splinters of Messala's chariot flew like sparks from an anvil. The Roman's chariot tipped violently, hit the ground, bounced, and shattered into pieces. Messala, caught in the reins, was hurled forward with brutal force. The horror escalated as the Sidonian, racing just behind, had no room to stop or turn. He crashed directly into the wreck, driving over the Roman and into his panicked horses. The scene dissolved into chaos, dust and hooves, cries and confusion. From the wreckage, the Sidonian somehow pulled himself out just in time to glimpse the Corinthian and Byzantine chasing after Ben-Hur, who had never paused, not for a heartbeat. The crowd erupted. They rose to their feet, screamed, gasped, cheered. Those who looked back saw glimpses of Messala beneath chariot wheels and rearing horses. He lay motionless, presumed dead, but most eyes stayed fixed on Ben-Hur. They had missed the exact moment he maneuvered his axle to strike Messala's wheel, crushing it with surgical precision. But they had seen his transformation, the fire in his face, the sudden dominance he wielded over the course, over the moment. And the race, what a race it had become. The Arab horses didn't just run, they soared like lions in flight. The chariot barely seemed to touch the ground. By the time the Corinthian and Byzantine near the midpoint, Ben-Hur had already turned the first goal. The victory was sealed. The race was won. The consul stood. The crowd lost itself in deafening celebration. The editor descended from his seat and crowned the victor. Among the other winners was a brutish-looking Saxon, low-browed and yellow-haired, whose presence caught Ben-Hur's eye. He recognized him, a former trainer from Rome, someone once familiar. Looking upward, Ben-Hur saw Simonides and his party on the balcony. They waved. Esther remained seated, but IRAs rose, offering a smile and a graceful wave of her fan, gestures sweetened by the thought that they might just as easily have been Messala's had he triumphed. Then, to the sound of continued cheers, the grand procession formed and exited through the gate of triumph. And with that, the day came to an end. Ben-Hur stayed with Ilderim across the river, waiting until midnight, when they would set off along the same path the caravan had taken 30 hours earlier. The sheik was in high spirits, offering generous gifts to express his gratitude, but Ben-Hur refused each one. He found his satisfaction solely in the humiliation of his rival. This respectful disagreement stretched on for some time. Ilderim spoke with pride of the honor Ben-Hur had brought him, imagining his name and the fame of his horses spreading far and wide, from Aqaba to the ocean, from the Euphrates to the Scythian Sea. He saw himself renewed in reputation, rising in influence despite his age, gaining spears and followers beyond count. He envisioned wealth through trade, exemption from tribute, and power even before Caesar. Yet, despite such promises, Ben-Hur declined, wishing instead that any increase in influence be offered in service of the coming king. He believed that such a gesture now would give him a greater claim for help in the future. In the middle of this exchange, two messengers arrived, one being Malik, the other unknown. Malik entered first, visibly overjoyed by the day's victory. He reported that after the conclusion of the games, some Roman factions quickly protested against paying the prize money. The news caused Ilderim to rise in outrage, but Malik quickly calmed him, explaining that the editor had already settled the payment and had dismissed the complaints. When accusations arose that Ben-Hur had struck Messala's wheel, the editor had simply laughed and reminded the crowd of the blow the Arabs endured at the turn. He then delivered more sobering news. The Athenian was dead, and although Messala had survived, his injuries would leave him unable to walk again. This revelation brought a quiet response from Ben-Hur, who looked to the heavens. He imagined his enemy, once so proud, now confined like Simonides, carried by others, but lacking the strength of character that gave dignity to suffering. Malik continued with political updates. Sanballat, Drusus, and others who had lost bets were refusing to pay. The matter had reached Consul Maxentius, who then referred it to Caesar. Public opinion was turning against the protesters, and Simonides was pleased. Whether they paid or not, Messala would be ruined, either financially or in honor. The implications stretched beyond the arena. Offending Ilderim or the eastern provinces could damage Roman strategy, especially with the Parthians in view. Confident, Ilderim resumed his cheerful mood and prepared for departure, trusting Simonides with the matter and celebrating their shared glory. Before leaving, Malik reminded Ilderim of the second messenger waiting outside. The sheik invited him in, and a well-mannered, delicate-looking youth entered. Kneeling, he delivered a message from Iras, daughter of Balthasar, who offered congratulations to the sheik on the victory. In gratitude, Ilderim removed a ring from his finger and instructed the youth to deliver it to her. The messenger then relayed another part of her message, an invitation for Ben-Hur to visit her the next day at the palace of Iderni, where her father had taken temporary residence. The request brought visible pleasure to Ben-Hur's face. With Ilderim's permission, he accepted the invitation, promising to visit at noon. The messenger departed in silence. Later that night, Ilderim began his journey, leaving behind a horse and guide for Ben-Hur, who would follow shortly. The next day, as arranged, Ben-Hur made his way toward the palace of Iderni to meet Iras. Leaving the omphalos, located in the heart of the city, he turned into the colonnade of Herod and soon reached the grand residence. From the bustling street, he entered a vestibule adorned with architectural nods to Egyptian design. There were stairways on each side, leading to a covered portico above. Winged lions flanked the steps, and at the center stood a massive stone ibis that spilled water over the floor below. Every element, the lions, the ibis, the stone walls, even the balustrades, carried the heavy presence of Egypt, rendered in unyielding gray stone. Above the vestibule, the portico rose gracefully, like a crown above the entrance. Its design was Greek in spirit, light, elegant, and perfectly proportioned. Fashioned of dazzling white marble, it resembled a lily that had casually landed atop a rugged stone. Ben-Hur paused under the portico, admiring the intricate tracery, the smooth finish, and the sheer purity of the marble before stepping through the open folding doors of the palace. The passageway he entered was tall but narrow, its floor tiled in deep red and its walls tinted to match. Though modest, the corridor gave way to a promise of beauty lying ahead. His steps were unhurried, his thoughts at ease. In moments, he would stand before Iras, playful, witty, enchanting. He recalled her invitations, the first during their moonlit boat ride, and now, once again, she had summoned him, this time to a palace bathed in elegance. His mood was light, filled with anticipation and dreamlike happiness. Soon, he reached a closed door. Just as he stopped, the door leaves began to open soundlessly, without so much as a click or touch. The marvel of it disappeared in the stunning sight that followed. From the dim hallway, Ben-Hur stepped into the atrium of a Roman-style mansion, so richly designed it bordered on the mythical. The chamber size defied description. The eye could not grasp its true dimensions because of the clever play of space and symmetry. Looking down, he found himself standing on a mosaic depicting Leda caressing a swan. The entire floor unfolded in similar imagery, mythological scenes rendered in fine mosaic. Exquisite stools, ornate chairs, and elaborately carved tables decorated the space, each a unique work of art. Luxurious couches invited rest, and the furnishings were mirrored on the polished floor with such clarity that they appeared to float above still water. Even the wall panels, painted figures, and ceiling frescoes reflected in the gleaming surface. Above, the ceiling arched upward to a central opening, allowing sunlight to stream in and touch every corner. The sky overhead seemed close enough to touch. The impluvium beneath was ringed with bronzed rails, and the sun caught the gilded columns around the opening, casting their reflections deep below. The room shimmered with candelabra, statues, and vases, a setting worthy of the Palatine Hill or the famed Tusculan villa of Scaurus. Still wrapped in his pleasant reverie, Ben-Hur wandered through the room, captivated by its beauty. He waited patiently. IRAs would arrive in her own time, or perhaps send a servant. This was, after all, the customary reception space in any refined Roman home. He circled the room once, then twice, pausing to gaze up at the open roof and its clear blue sky. Leaning against a pillar, he admired how the light and shadows danced across the room. Some parts blurred in softness, others sharpened into brilliance. Still, no one appeared. As the minutes stretched on, his sense of time began to awaken. He examined the floor's images again, but the second viewing offered less delight. He listened for footsteps, straining to hear movement. A faint stir of impatience touched him, then returned, stronger. At last, he realized how deep the silence had grown, an unnatural quiet that unsettled him. He tried to brush it off with humor, telling himself that IRAs was merely applying the final touches to her appearance or preparing some floral arrangement. Surely, she would arrive even more radiant after the delay. He sat to admire a candelabrum, a masterpiece of bronze, rolling on a decorated plinth. Filigree adorned its edges. One end bore a post, the other an altar and a woman in ceremony. The lamp rests hung from drooping palm branches by delicate chains. It was marvelous, yet even its artistry couldn't drown out the pressing silence. He listened as he looked, but the stillness remained. The palace was as quiet as a tomb. Unease crept in. Could there have been a mistake? He recalled that the messenger had clearly come from IRAs, and this was, unmistakably, the palace of Ilderim. Still, he remembered the odd way the door had opened, so smoothly, without sound or hand. A need to test things rose in him. He approached the same door. Every footstep now sounded too loud, too harsh. He shrank from his own presence, his nerves beginning to fray. The heavy Roman lock resisted when he tried it gently. Trying again with greater force, he felt the blood leave his face. He pulled with all his strength. It didn't budge. Panic sparked. He paused to consider. Who in Antioch would want to harm him? Only one name came to mind: Messala. He thought of the palace's strange mix of styles. Egypt in the vestibule, Greece in the portico. But here, inside, everything screamed of Rome. The atrium, once elegant, now felt deceptive. The grandeur had become a snare. His instincts sharpened. This was not a visit. This was a trap. The realization stirred anger in him. On either side of the atrium, there were many doors, likely leading to sleeping chambers. He tried each one, but they were locked tight. Knocking might stir a response, but unwilling to draw attention by shouting, he withdrew to a couch and lay down, trying to collect his thoughts. It was clear now. He was a prisoner. But why? And who had confined him? The thought of Messala stirred his mind. If this was indeed his doing, then so be it. Rising abruptly, he looked around, a defiant smile tugging at his face. Weapons decorated the tables around him. Though he recalled how even birds had withered in golden cages, he was no bird. The couches, if needed, could serve as battering rams. He was strong, and desperation had a way of lending power beyond ordinary limits. Rage could be his ally. Messala, crippled like Simonides, could no longer act himself, but he could command others, and there were always those willing to move at his word. Determined, Ben-Hur tested the doors once more. He even called out once, only to be startled by the echo. With a forced calm, he resolved to wait, for now, before attempting escape. In such moments, the mind wavers between unease and fleeting stillness. How much time passed, he couldn't say, but eventually, he settled on the idea that this might all be a mistake, an accident. Surely, someone owned the palace, and if so, there must be a keeper. Sooner or later, that keeper would come, perhaps by evening, perhaps at night. He told himself to be patient, and waited. About half an hour slipped by, though it felt far longer to him. Then, the same door that had let him in opened and closed once again, silently, without drawing his attention. At that instant, he sat at the far end of the room. A footstep suddenly broke the silence, catching him off guard. Relief swept through him as he assumed she had returned. Rising quickly, his heart stirred with hope. But the step was heavy, rough, accompanied by the scrape and clatter of coarse sandals. The golden pillars obscured his view of the door. He moved forward slowly and leaned against one of them. Voices followed, harsh, unfamiliar. The words weren't from the East or Southern Europe. The language was foreign. Two men eventually stepped into view. One extremely stout, both tall, dressed in short tunics. Their manner didn't match the bearing of owners or servants. Instead, they looked about with wonder, examining objects freely, touching everything. They were out of place, vulgar in contrast to the grace of the atrium. Yet they moved with confidence, as if on assignment. But with whom? They strolled about, conversing in their coarse tongue, inching closer to the pillar where Ben-Hur stood. A statue caught their eye, where sunlight struck the floor in a vivid gleam. There they paused. The strange silence of the palace had already frayed Ben-Hur's nerves. But now, as he recognized one of the intruders, a cold unease rippled through him. The stout man was the Northman he had known in Rome, the very one crowned victor in the circus only yesterday. His face bore scars from countless battles, hardened by brutal passions. His limbs, exposed and sculpted by endless training, radiated raw power. His shoulders were massive, monstrous even. Everything about him radiated menace. Ben-Hur felt a sudden, chilling certainty. The opportunity for murder was too perfect to be coincidence. These were not random visitors. These were enforcers, sent for him. The other man, though younger, had piercing black eyes, dark hair, and the distinct features of Jew. Both were dressed exactly as arena fighters often were. Piecing it together, Ben-Hur could no longer deny the truth. He had been lured here, trapped, isolated in this lavish solitude, not to be questioned, but to be killed. Paralyzed by uncertainty, he looked from one man to the other. In that suspended moment, his life played out before him, each memory vivid, as though he were watching another's story. Yet from somewhere deep within, a powerful realization surfaced. He had entered a new chapter of life, one in which he would no longer be a victim, but an avenger. Just yesterday, he had claimed his first retribution. To one shaped purely by Christian grace, such a vision might have brought guilt, but not to him. His spirit followed the law of the first prophet, not the last. Messala had not been wronged. He had been judged. That triumph had come by the Lord's allowance, and through that knowledge, Ben-Hur found his faith again, faith that forged strength, especially when peril loomed. But the realization did not end with faith alone. A deeper conviction stirred within him, that this new life was no accident, but a mission divinely ordained. Sacred as the king whose arrival was foretold, and as certain as his coming. It was a calling that justified strength when strength became necessity. Would he now falter, right at the edge of such a purpose? Without hesitation, he loosened the sash at his waist, removed his white Jewish robe, and uncovered his head, clothed now in a simple undertunic. Much like that worn by his adversaries, he stood ready in body and will. Crossing his arms, he leaned back against a pillar and waited in silence. The stranger's study of the statue was brief. Soon, the Northman turned and spoke in his coarse tongue. Their eyes settled on Ben-Hur. After exchanging a few more words, they began walking toward him. He stood his ground and addressed them in Latin. His voice was firm and unyielding. One of them responded with a cold smile that barely softened his brutal features. The word he offered was simple and mocking. Ben-Hur pressed further, identifying the place and demanding to know their business. But the response that followed was a taunt, dismissing his Roman claim and ridiculing his heritage. Amused by his own jest, the Northman turned again to his companion, and they drew closer. Ben-Hur stepped away from the pillar, signaling for a pause. The Saxon responded with a relaxed stance and agreed to hear him. Ben-Hur named him Thord, the Northman, and stated his former place in Rome. Thord confirmed part of it, though denied ever having trained a Jew. Yet Ben-Hur insisted he could prove it. Here now, he accused them of coming to kill him, and from the Northman's admission, there was no denying it. So he challenged the second man to fight, alone, and promised the proof would lie in the outcome. Amused, the Northman agreed. With childlike ease, he shoved a couch aside with his foot, reclined upon it, and signaled the match to begin. Ben-Hur approached his opponent directly, calling him to prepare. The man did so, without hesitation. They squared off in silence, each man poised and balanced. Their build and strength seemed matched, almost like brothers. But where the stranger carried the confidence of routine, Ben-Hur's focus radiated deep intent, his eyes a quiet warning to those who could recognize it. Both understood this was no display. It was a fight to the death. Ben-Hur led with a feint to the right. His opponent responded, raising a guard. But before he could recover, Ben-Hur's iron grip caught his wrist, arms strengthened by years of toil at the oars now acting with devastating force. What followed happened in a blur. A twist, a shift, a strike to the exposed neck beneath the ear. The man collapsed with a thud, silent, lifeless. Ben-Hur turned to Thord. Surprised, the Northman bolted upright. Then, with genuine admiration, he laughed, a full, deep sound that echoed through the hall. He admitted the maneuver had been one of his own, honed over a decade in Roman arenas. He could not have executed it better himself. Rising now, Thord took a long look at Ben-Hur, admiration plain in his eyes. The move was a signature technique, one taught only to the finest. Curious, he pressed to know who he truly was. Ben-Hur gave a name, Arius, the Roman duumvir. Thord remembered him well, and the boy who had trained under his patronage. That boy had once shown promise enough to earn Caesar's attention. Thord had trained him himself, taught him the very trick just performed, a feat only possible for one with a might to match his own. That technique had won many crowns in its time. Ben-Hur revealed his identity. He was that son. Recognition bloomed in Thord's eyes. He stepped closer, his expression softening into something nearly joyful. Then, laughing again, he reached out his hand in greeting, one of equals. Thord admitted he had been deceived. He had been told a Jew awaited him, a target, a dog to be slaughtered in the name of the gods. Ben-Hur asked who had sent him, and Thord answered, without hesitation. It was Messala. Then came the final question, when the reply was calm and chilling. The night before, from his sickbed, groaning in pain, Messala had spoken the words. In only a few words, there had been painted a vivid image of hatred, undeniable and raw. From that alone, Ben-Hur understood something crucial. If the Romans survived, he would remain a threat. His will to destroy would not fade but grow sharper, fueled now by revenge. The one sweet remnant left in a life already ruined by loss and humiliation. That explained his desperate clinging to wealth lost in the wager with Sanballat. Ben-Hur considered the situation, tracing the path ahead and foreseeing the many ways Messala could interfere with the mission he had accepted, an undertaking not for self, but for the king yet to come. The thought struck him, why not respond with the Romans' own methods? The same man hired to kill could be bought to protect, or even retaliate, and Ben-Hur had the means to offer more. The temptation gripped him with force, but just as he neared consent, his eyes dropped to the fallen assassin. The man lay still, his face pale, and turned to the ceiling, so eerily similar to his own. And suddenly, a new idea sparked within him. He turned to Thord and posed a question. What had Messala promised in return for murder? The answer came plainly, 1,000 sestertii. Ben-Hur offered the sum still, but with new purpose. And more, if Thord followed his instructions to the letter, for 1,000 sestertii would be his in total. The giant weighed the offer aloud, counting aloud his winnings. 5,000 from yesterday, 1 from Messala. That made 6. For more would make 10. He paused, tempted. Then, in a moment of coarse humor, he pledged his loyalty, boldly swearing to remain firm, even if the gods themselves struck him down. For 4,000 more, he would do even worse to Messala, if asked. He mimicked the act of silencing a man by clapping a hand over his mouth. But Ben-Hur had no such vengeance in mind. He reminded Thord that 10,000 sestertii was a fortune, enough to return to Rome and open a wine shop near the Great Circus. It would be a life worthy of one who had once stood among the Lanisti. The vision seemed to awaken joy within the Northman. Even the old scars on his face appeared to glow with the promise of such a future. Ben-Hur went on. He confirmed the offer. 4,000 it would be, and in earning it, Thord would not need to spill another drop of blood. The plan was clean. He asked, had not the dead man looked much like him? Thord admitted the likeness was remarkable, like fruit from the same tree. Then Ben-Hur laid out the deception. If he wore the man's tunic, and the body was dressed in his own garments, and they both left the palace as one, who would doubt the story? The body left behind would appear to be his, and Thord, returning alone, could claim the deed was done. Messala would pay, never knowing the truth. The giant's laughter rang out like thunder, hearty and wild. The scheme delighted him. 10,000 sestertii won without a blade raised. A lie without blood. A future in Rome. He extended his hand to Ben-Hur with joy. He spoke again of the wine shop, repeating its name and promising a warm welcome, swearing to serve the best, even if it meant borrowing from Caesar himself. They shook hands, sealing the pact. The exchange of clothing was swift. They agreed upon delivery of the payment, 4,000 sestertii, to be sent at night to Thord's lodging. With the plan in place, the giant knocked at the door, and it opened to him. From the atrium, he led Ben-Hur into an adjoining room, where the latter completed the disguise, dressing himself in the coarse garments of the slain pugilist. When they were ready, they parted ways in the great circular hall of the omphalos. Thord's final words rang with laughter and pride. He called again to the son of Areus, urging him not to forget the wine shop near the Great Circus. And then, with a laugh full of victory, he blessed him and took his leave. Before departing, Ben-Hur paused to look back one final time. The body in the Jewish robes lay undisturbed, and the resemblance was astonishing. If Thord remained true to his word, the deception would remain hidden. The secret would be safe forever. That night, in the house of Simonides, Ben-Hur shared every detail of what had occurred within the palace of Idrone. Together, they resolved to begin after a short delay, a public investigation to trace the whereabouts of the son of Arius. Their plan was to bring the matter openly before Maxentius, if needed. Should the mystery remain unresolved, they believed it would bring a sense of peace to both Messala and Gratus, and would finally free Ben-Hur to journey on to Jerusalem in search of his missing family. When it came time to part ways, Simonides remained seated on the terrace that overlooked the flowing river, offering his farewell and the peace of the Lord with the weight and warmth of a father's blessing. Esther walked with Ben-Hur to the head of the steps, and he promised her that, if he were to find his mother, she would go to Jerusalem and become a sister to Tirzah. With that promise, he offered her a kiss. Whether it was a kiss of simple peace or something deeper remained unspoken. He crossed the river and arrived at the old quarters of Ilderim, where the Arab guide was already waiting. The horses were brought forward, and the guide pointed to one of them, Aldebaran, the fastest and most radiant of Myra's sons, second only to Sirius, and dearly loved by the Sheik. It was clear to Ben-Hur that the old man's heart had been sent with the horse. Meanwhile, under the shadow of night, the body that lay in the atrium was quietly buried, all part of Messala's calculated scheme. A courier was dispatched to Gratus with news meant to ease his mind, confirmation that Ben-Hur was dead beyond doubt. Soon after, near the Circus Maximus, a new wine shop opened its doors to the public, with a sign boldly displayed above, Thor the Northman. And so, under the veil of night, the wheels of destiny turn ever onward. Secrets are buried, paths are chosen, and hearts begin to stir with silent hope. Yet in the shadow of Rome's grandeur, truth waits to rise, like light breaking through the storm. Stay with us, dear listener. The journey of Judah Ben-Hur has only just begun. In the next episode, the search deepens, and a fateful return to Jerusalem awaits. If you found this story meaningful, please like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter of Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ. Thank you for listening.